Good evening and welcome back to this quiet corner of the internet where the lights are low, the pace is slow, and history gets to breathe. Tonight we're stepping into a year that felt, at the time, perfectly ordinary. 1974. No wars fought with swords, no famines, no plagues sweeping through crowded medieval streets. Just an average American Tuesday, in a decade when the seatbelt lived in the crease of the seat cushion. The cigarette lived in everyone's hand, and the front door of your house didn't even remember what a lock felt like. Before we drift into it, a small thank you to everyone who's followed this channel from one slow, sleepy story to the next. If tonight's journey helps you drift off, consider leaving the video running, subscribing for the next one, and telling me in the comments where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is wherever you are. There's also a quiet membership tier now, for anyone who wants the extended 8-hour version of nights like this one ad-free, for the nights when sleep takes its time arriving. No pressure there at all. And if screens aren't your thing before bed, the channel now lives on Spotify too, so you can simply listen in the dark. Now settle in. Turn on a fan if you have one just for that low, steady hum. Pull the blanket up. Let your eyes get heavy. And let me ask you something before we begin. Have you ever wondered what it was like to grow up without anyone quite watching you? To vanish after breakfast and not be expected home until the sky changed color? To watch a grown man light a cigarette in a hospital bed, or a doctor's office, or 30,000 feet in the air? To climb into the open bed of a pickup truck for a summer drive with nothing between you and the highway but wind? Wonder no more. Tonight, you're waking up in 1974, in a house with shag carpet and wood paneling, in a world quietly and cheerfully unaware of just how many of its everyday habits were, in fact, small acts of tremendous risk. Sleep well, let's begin. The back of the family wagon. Your family's car is a station wagon the approximate size and shape of a small boat, and this morning, like most mornings, you are not sitting in a seat at all. You are lying in the very back, the flat, carpeted cargo hold behind the last row of bench seating with no belt, no chair, and as far as anyone in this car is concerned, no need for either. You're on your stomach, chin propped on your folded arms, watching the road unreel backward through the rear window, occasionally lifting a hand to wave at truck drivers who blink their lights back at you in return. If your father hits the brakes hard, you will slide. Everyone understands this. Nobody worries about it. It is simply how the back of the wagon works, less a compartment for cargo than an entire second nation of children with its own laws, its own border disputes over who gets the spot nearest the window, and its own complete independence from whatever is happening up front. The car itself deserves a moment of its own appreciation. It has fake wood panels bolted along each flank, a hood long enough to land a small aircraft on, and a rear window that rolls down at the touch of a button. A genuine marvel of engineering that nobody in this car has connected, even once, to the fact that it doubles as the easiest exit route for a child in motion. Down here in the cargo hold, the air smells like sun-warmed vinyl, a faint whisper of gasoline, and the ghost of some spilled soda that fused itself permanently into the carpet sometime around Easter. This isn't a 10-minute errand. Road trips are measured here in states crossed, not minutes passed. You and your siblings sprawl across that carpet for the length of entire vacations, trading insults, playing cards, occasionally cranking the tailgate window down to let the wind roar through and steal somebody's comic book clean out of their hands. When your father takes a curve with any enthusiasm at all, the whole pile of you slides sideways as one unit, shrieking with laughter, and immediately begs him to do it again. There's a certain genius in the arrangement if you look at it from the front seat. The noise, the fighting, the chaos, all of it happens in a separate compartment, muffled by 2 rows of bench seating and the drone of the highway. Your mother can smoke her cigarette in relative peace. Your father can keep half an ear on the ball game, and the children, banished to the very rear of the vehicle, are having by their own account the time of their lives, precisely because no adult is close enough to interrupt them. Set this beside a modern car seat, a 5-point harness, rear-facing until the child can nearly recite the alphabet, a chime that sounds if a seatbelt isn't properly latched, another chime if a bag of groceries shifts in the seat next to it. The 1974 child, by comparison, is essentially unsecured freight, riding the interstate with a bag of chips and zero awareness that gravity has plans for anyone not tied down. And the remarkable thing, the thing that still startles people looking back, is that so many of these children simply grew up fine, rattled loose across 1,000 miles of highway, and lived to become the very same adults who now white-knuckle the armrest of an airport shuttle. The baby in mother's arms. The smallest passenger in this family doesn't ride in the back at all. In 1974, the safest seat for a newborn is widely considered to be exactly where it's always been, cradled in the crook of a mother's arm, in the front seat, no more than a few feet from the windshield. Car seats do technically exist, but most of them are little more than flimsy vinyl slings hung over the seatback, designed to keep an infant from sliding around, not to keep them anchored during a collision. Many even come with a small plastic steering wheel bolted to the front, so the baby can pretend to drive, which tells you rather a lot about what the manufacturers believed the seat's job actually was. Entertainment, not protection. So instead, your mother holds you, one arm around you, the other steering, a cigarette occasionally balanced between two fingers of the hand doing the steering. If the car stops short, her plan, genuinely, sincerely, her plan is to catch you with her own body. Nobody in this decade finds that plan alarming. It feels, if anything, like the more loving option. The idea of setting a baby down in a hard plastic shell, bolted to the frame of the car, away from her own arms, strikes her as cold. Unnatural, almost neglectful. There is no chime warning her otherwise, no pamphlet from the pediatrician sounding an alarm, no evening news segment. The whole culture is quietly, collectively certain that a mother's arms are restrained enough. And on this one specific point, the whole culture is dangerously wrong. Not through carelessness, through love, misapplied. She is doing exactly what her own mother did. And her mother before her, and nobody has yet told her there's a better way. The belt nobody buckles. Every car built in this decade comes equipped with seatbelts. The law requires it now, but wearing one is treated as a strange, faintly paranoid personal choice, roughly on par with wearing a bicycle helmet to eat dinner. The belt itself lives buried in the crease of the seat, gathering loose change, stray popcorn, and a fine dusting of ancient potato chip crumbs, fusing slowly with the upholstery into its own little archaeological stratum. There's a real social cost to digging it out. To reach down, brush off the crumbs and click it into place is, in the unspoken language of the car, an announcement that you have doubts about the driver, about the road, about the whole enterprise. Buckling up in front of your father is liable to earn you a wounded glance in the rearview mirror, as if you just questioned his very competence as a human being. So you leave it alone. You sit there unbelted, subtly protecting his ego with your own unrestrained body. The unbuckled adult, meanwhile, drives with tremendous unearned confidence. An elbow out the window, two fingers on the wheel, a full body turn to yell at the kids in the back seat while doing 60. His actual safety plan, should anything go wrong, amounts to this: brace himself. Simply become, in the space of half a second, strong enough to resist being thrown into the windshield. A feat no human being has ever managed, attempted daily by millions who are all quite sure they'll be the exception. Decades later, this same overconfident driver will be the one leaning across the back seat, checking 3 times that his grandchild's car seat is buckled exactly right, having quietly made peace with how wrong he once was. Riding in the open truck bed. On a warm evening, someone suggests a drive, and naturally, you and half a dozen cousins climb straight into the open bed of a pickup truck. No rails, no seats, nothing but the wheel well to brace your feet against and the wind to hold on to. You perch up on the edge like a hood ornament with strong opinions, hair whipping sideways, bugs finding their way into your teeth, cruising along at 40 miles an hour with nothing but good luck between you and the pavement. This isn't a special outing. It's a Tuesday, and every single one of you would swear, hand on heart, that this is the best night of the summer. The truck bed is a flat steel tray, and into it goes whatever needs moving that evening: firewood, a dog, a cooler, and anywhere from 4 to 9 children arranged with no particular logic. The good spot is up against the cab, sheltered from the worst of the wind. The bad spot is back by the tailgate, where one enthusiastic pothole could, in theory, launch you clean onto the road, a fact everyone acknowledges and nobody plans around. What makes it feel magical from a child's point of view is precisely the thing that makes it dangerous. You are entirely outside, moving at highway speed, watching the world spool out behind you instead of rushing toward you through glass. The sky does its whole sunset performance overhead. The wind flattens your shirt against your chest. You can lie back and watch telephone wires rise and dip against the darkening sky, feeling the road hum straight up through the steel into your spine, and there is simply no equivalent for that feeling sealed inside a car. Up front, the adults have their own quiet evening going, windows down, radio on, occasionally sliding open the little rear window to holler a head count into the wind, which promptly scatters the words before anyone can properly answer. 6, was it? Close enough. As long as the tangle of limbs in the mirror looks roughly the right size, all is well. A modern parent doing this today would face a citation, possibly worse, regardless of the speed or the road. And rightly so. The very thing that made it feel like flying is the same thing that made it lethal. But in 1974, none of that math has been done yet. You're up on the wheel well, king of the whole highway, bugs in your teeth and joy in your chest, blissfully unaware that you are, at this exact moment, the crumple zone. A smoking section at 30,000 feet. You board a flight, find your narrow seat, and the very first thing half the cabin does once the plane levels off is light a cigarette. There is, technically, a smoking section, an idea that works about as well as a designated peeing section in a swimming pool, since the cabin is one long, continuously recirculating tube of shared air. The smoke doesn't recognize the little paper sign separating row 12 from row 13. It drifts forward, settles into the seat fabric, curls past the non-smoking rows, and quietly seasons everyone's in-flight peanuts. Every single armrest comes with its own small chrome ashtray, built directly into the seat design, as fundamental a feature as the tray table or the little net pocket for the safety card. The flight attendants move through the thickening haze with total calm, pouring drinks, handing out peanuts, and lighting their own cigarettes during the quiet stretches, because they too are people, and people on airplanes smoke. Consider the physics of it for a moment, because that's the part that lands hardest from here. This is not a smoky bar you can step outside of. This is a sealed aluminum cylinder, 7 miles above the earth, no windows that open, recirculated air pumped in a loop. And inside it, 150 people are cheerfully combusting tobacco for 5 straight hours. The infant 3 rows back is breathing it. The man traveling to see a lung specialist is breathing it, deeply, because breathing on an airplane is not optional. And remarkably, nobody experiences any of this as an outrage, because there's no alternative to compare it to. A smoke-free flight to this cabin isn't even a fantasy, it's a concept that doesn't exist yet. A hospital that smells of tobacco. You've landed, and as it happens, you're not feeling well, so off to the hospital you go, where the air itself carries the faint, warm smell of cigarettes. Patients smoke from their beds. Visitors smoke in the waiting room. Your doctor, delivering the test results, pauses mid-sentence to tap ash into a little metal tray balanced beside your chart. Somewhere down the hall, an ashtray is bolted to the wall directly beside an oxygen line. A combination that reads, even to modern eyes with no medical training whatsoever, like the opening line of a very short and very bad story. The hospital gift shop sells cigarettes, So does the vending machine in the lobby. A man recovering from a chest complaint lights up in his hospital gown while a nurse checks his vitals and thinks absolutely nothing of it. Because in 1974, nobody has yet drawn the line connecting the cigarette in his hand to the complaint in his chest. Your own doctor, in fact, is very possibly smoking too, and it does something rather unexpected for his credibility. A physician with a cigarette in hand looks composed, confident, like a man who has seen everything and isn't rattled by any of it. He explains your chart through a slow exhale of smoke, and somehow you find that reassuring rather than alarming. A cigarette for the nerves. Your mother is expecting, and she is smoking her way calmly through the entire pregnancy. And here's the genuinely startling part. Her obstetrician isn't worried. Some doctors of this era go further still, gently suggesting that a cigarette might actually help steady the nerves, curb the appetite, keep the extra weight in check. Magazine advertisements show glowing, glamorous young mothers-to-be lighting up beside the bassinet. Cigarette held just so. The picture of a modern woman handling motherhood with total poise. The reasoning of the time is a small, sincere masterpiece of being confidently, completely wrong. A calm mother is a healthy mother, and a cigarette calms the nerves, so by this logic, the cigarette is practically doing its own quiet bit of prenatal care. She isn't defying her doctor's advice by smoking. In a great many cases, she is following it to the letter. She sits across the desk from him, cigarette in hand, and he often has his own lit as well, and they discuss the pregnancy through a shared, gentle haze. He tells her to relax, not to stress, to take it easy. What he does not tell her, because the science hasn't yet hardened into public certainty, is that the thing in her hand is reaching you, the baby, with every single breath she takes. She reads the gentle parenting books of the era, none of which sound any alarm on this particular subject. She takes her vitamins. She keeps every appointment. She follows the guidance she is given, faithfully, completely, and the guidance simply doesn't yet include the one detail that would end up mattering the most. This isn't a failure of love. It's a failure of an entire system that hasn't caught up yet, and she is standing quietly inside that gap, doing her sincere best. A building made of smoke. Back to the office, into a building that looks and smells like a cloud bank wearing a necktie. Every single desk has its own ashtray, a heavy glass fixture as fundamental to the furniture as the telephone or the stapler. Meetings happen inside a fog thick enough to make the flip chart at the front of the room genuinely hard to read. Your boss smokes a cigar behind his desk with the door propped generously open, sharing the aroma with the whole floor. There's no such thing as a smoke break because there's no need for one. The smoking simply happens continuously, over the typewriter, through the phone call, above the paperwork all day, every day. The elevator deserves its own special mention as the most concentrated experience of all. A tiny sealed box, several smokers stepping in at once, no air exchange for 10 straight floors. You emerge from it lightly cured, and the social contract holds perfectly anyway, everyone facing forward, shoulder to shoulder, adding quietly to the haze, because to abstain in the elevator would be no different from abstaining anywhere else in the building, which is to say, simply unthinkable. The building itself keeps a permanent record of all this in its surfaces. The ceiling tiles shift slowly from white to a soft nicotine tan. The carpet, the curtains, the upholstery of every chair holds the smell so completely that it becomes, in everyone's mind, simply the smell of a working day, indistinguishable from productivity itself. A new hire notices the smell for exactly one day, and then never again, absorbed into the atmosphere along with everybody else. The rare non-smoker on the floor has no one to complain to, and honestly, no real standing to complain in the first place. The air belongs to everyone, and everyone has already decided how to spend it. A child sent to buy cigarettes. Your mother is out of cigarettes, so she presses a crumpled dollar bill into your hand and sends you down to the corner store to fetch her a fresh pack. The clerk sells them to you without so much as a raised eyebrow, and might even slide a piece of penny candy across the counter for your trouble. There's a vending machine in the diner, too, dispensing packs to anyone tall enough to reach the lever, which includes most 9-year-olds standing on a friend's shoulders. Nobody checks your age, because checking isn't really a concept that exists yet. You're running an errand with the exact same social weight as fetching a loaf of bread. Your mother writes the brand on a scrap of paper so you don't forget, tells you to come straight back, and off you go, a small, serious courier on official household business. The clerk sees nothing unusual in any of this, because there is nothing unusual to see. Children buying cigarettes for their parents is simply Tuesday. The vending machine is the fully self-service version of the same idea. Feed in the coins, pull the heavy lever with both hands, and the pack thunks down into the tray. No gate, no verification, no cashier at all, just a machine trusting that whoever's tall enough to reach it has a reason to be there. 3 martinis and a drive home. At noon, it's time for lunch, and lunch, if you're a certain kind of professional, means 3 martinis. This isn't scandalous, it's a tax-deductible institution. The first drink arrives before the menus even do, understood as the warm-up, the icebreaker, the drink during which nobody discusses anything of substance. The second arrives with the food, and it's during the second that the real conversation begins, loosened, expansive, full of handshake energy. The third is the closer, the drink over which the deal gets settled, or at least gets agreed to be settled later. Your client doesn't just tolerate this ritual, he requires it. A man who won't drink at lunch reads in this culture as stiff, untrustworthy, someone playing his cards too close to the vest. Business is built on relationships, and relationships in 1974 are built over gin. Declining the martini is a small act of professional sabotage. And the company is delighted to pay for the whole performance, because the tax code smiles on it too. The long, boozy lunch isn't a loophole anyone is sneaking through. It's the front door, the accepted cost of doing business. Then comes the return to the office, genuinely impaired, where you'll sign a few documents you won't fully remember signing tomorrow morning. And then comes the drive home, 3 martinis deep, out into rush hour traffic with everyone else who just did precisely the same thing at their own lunch across town. All of you cheerfully certain, as this whole decade tends to be, that you are absolutely fine. That drive itself comes with its own passenger, an open beer. Wedged snugly between your knees since cup holders haven't been invented yet, sipped at stop signs like a responsible adult. There's no such thing as an open container law worth worrying about, so the car functions more or less as a rolling tavern. The cooler lives in the back seat. The passengers pass cans forward freely. The empties collect on the floor, clinking gently over every bump, a soft percussion marking a road trip well spent. You keep the can low over rough patches and sip only on the straightaways, a set of self-imposed rules that feel, in your own mind, like genuine caution, and are in fact elaborate theater performed around a fundamentally reckless act. Left in the car, left in the neighborhood. You need to run into the bank, so naturally you leave the kids in the car, windows cracked, engine off, keys in your pocket, and what you generously estimate will be 5 minutes and what will actually be 40. This isn't neglect. In 1974, this is simply called parking. The kids know the drill. They fight over the front seat, they honk the horn, they climb around and pretend to drive to imaginary destinations. And on a hot day, the car slowly becomes an oven, and everyone involved simply calls it a warm afternoon. Nobody intervenes, because there is no one whose job or instinct it is to intervene. A stranger walking past a car full of unattended children on a warm day sees nothing worth a second glance, let alone a phone call. The entire social machinery that would one day treat this as an emergency simply hasn't been built. And when you're not baking gently in a parked sedan, you're simply gone out the door after breakfast and not seen again until the streetlights flicker on, which is the universal citywide signal to come home. In between, you range for miles on foot and bicycle, crossing real roads with real traffic, exploring the drainage ditch, knocking on the doors of kids you've never met to ask if they can come out and play. There are no phones, no check-ins, no plan filed anywhere. Your mother's entire supervision system is a loud voice and the setting sun, and remarkably, mostly, it works. Thumbing a ride. Need to travel farther than your bike will carry you. You simply stick out your thumb. Hitchhiking is a completely mainstream way to get around, practiced by students, soldiers, and the occasional grandmother alike. You stand at the on-ramp with a cardboard sign scrawled with your destination, and a total stranger pulls over, and you climb in, and for the next hour or two you trade full, honest life stories with a man whose name you'll never actually learn, and then he drops you at his exit and drives out of your life forever, and you stick your thumb back out for the next leg. It's considered friendly, economical, and only mildly dangerous, which, in this decade, counts as a fairly ringing endorsement. Lawn darts in a yard full of children. Back home, someone brings out the lawn darts for some good clean backyard fun, and these are not the soft plastic kind. These are genuine metal-tipped projectiles, weighted deliberately so they fall point first, designed to be lobbed high into the air toward a small plastic ring on the grass, and by extension, toward any toddler who happens to wander beneath the flight path at the wrong moment. Everyone is having a wonderful time. The darts come down with real authority. And this game is sold, on purpose, in ordinary stores to ordinary families. The paddle in the closet. At school, misbehavior is corrected with a wooden paddle, sometimes drilled with holes that everyone earnestly believes reduces air resistance and increases speed. Teachers keep their own personal paddle, the way a sommelier keeps a favorite vintage, and the punishment is often delivered in front of the whole class, because the humiliation isn't a side effect, it's the entire point. And if word reaches your parents, they are not angry at the school. They're angry at you, and there is a real chance of a second round waiting at home. Authority doesn't stop at your own front door, either. If you misbehave 3 houses down, the neighbor is fully entitled to correct you on the spot and march you home to report the incident, and your own mother will thank her for it. Chasing the mosquito fog. On summer evenings, a truck rolls slowly down the street belching a thick white cloud of pesticide into the warm air, and every child on the block sprints joyfully into it, running, laughing, chasing the truck to the end of the road and back, breathing deep, playing tag in a visibility of about 3 feet. The grown-ups wave from their porches, glad the mosquitoes are being handled. A world seasoned in lead. Lead in 1974 is more or less a food group. It's in the gasoline, seasoning the air of every city street. It's in the paint on your window sills, which toddlers gnaw on with real enthusiasm because leaded paint has a genuinely sweet taste. It's in the pipes, the solder on the canned food, the glaze on the dishes. Nobody has connected the dots yet because the damage it does is quiet, gradual, and easy to blame on anything else. 18 and legal. Turn 18 in much of the country, and you can walk straight into a bar and order a beer, because if the nation trusts you with a ballot and a rifle, the reasoning goes, it can certainly trust you with a drink. The drinking age varies wildly state to state, creating a patchwork that sends thirsty teenagers driving across state lines all evening long and driving back again afterward. Explosives for the 4th of July. Someone hands a 12-year-old a fistful of genuine explosives, cherry bombs and M80s, not sparklers, with instructions that amount to go outside and be careful. The neighborhood sounds like a distant war all afternoon. Fingers are occasionally lost. Every kid on the block still calls it the greatest day of the year. A nation briefly, cheerfully naked. Streaking sweeps the country through football fields, college campuses, and live television broadcasts. And the general public response is delighted laughter rather than a squad car. A pill for energy, a pill for weight. Doctors cheerfully prescribe amphetamines for tired housewives who want more energy and a smaller waistline, marketed as a modern miracle rather than anything to be cautious about. Cough syrup off the open shelf. Certain cough syrups sit right on the pharmacy shelf, laced with a genuine opiate, sold without so much as a signature, right next to the gum and the magazines. The backyard burn barrel. Garbage day is a rusty metal drum in the backyard, into which everything goes, paper, plastic, food, and is then set gloriously on fire, sending black smoke drifting over the fence into the whole neighborhood's evening air. Rifles in the school parking lot. Out in rural America, the high school lot is dotted with pickup trucks, and in the rear window of more than a few sits a hunting rifle. Because deer season doesn't wait for algebra class, and nobody here finds that remarkable in the slightest. A keg in the basement. Parents go away for the weekend, and a keg appears in the basement as if by magic. And sometimes the parents are even home upstairs, having decided that if the kids are drinking anyway, better here than out on the road somewhere. 12 years old behind the wheel. On the farm, the driving age is less a law than a suggestion based on whether your legs reach the pedals, and the county sheriff simply waves as you rumble past in the family pickup, underage and unlicensed, and entirely at home behind the wheel. A house that never locks. And at the end of this long, cheerfully hazardous day, you come home to a front door that has been unlocked since the day the house was built, a car idling trustfully in the driveway with the keys still in it, and you settle in for the night behind a door you won't bother to lock, in a world that hasn't yet learned to be afraid of itself. The office wrapped in its own weather. Let's step back into work, into a building that has, over the years, developed its own permanent indoor climate, and that climate is smoke. Every desk on the floor has its own ashtray, and this is not some minor accessory tucked into a drawer somewhere. It's a proper fixture, usually a heavy glass thing with a satisfying weight to it, sitting on the corner of the desk with the same permanence as the telephone or the stapler or the framed photo of the family. It fills steadily through the working day, cigarette after cigarette stubbed out and left to smolder for a moment before going cold, until by 4 in the afternoon it resembles a small gray mountain range of crushed filters. The cleaning staff empties it every evening, and by lunchtime the next day, it's already halfway back to full. Picture your own desk right now, at this very moment in the story. There's a cigarette balanced on the lip of the ashtray, burning down slowly while you type, sending up a thin, lazy ribbon of smoke that joins the general indoor weather of the room. You didn't light it 5 minutes ago intending to think much about it. It's just there, the way a cup of coffee is there, refilled and relit throughout the day without any real ceremony. The conference room is where this atmosphere reaches its full, glorious density. 8 people file in, someone closes the door for privacy, and within minutes, 6 or 7 of those 8 have lit up more or less simultaneously. Over the course of an hour-long meeting, the room generates its own weather system. By the time anyone gets around to the flip chart at the front, the words on it have gone soft and blurry through the haze, and reading them requires squinting through a fog that has nowhere to escape to, because the windows in this building, like the windows in most buildings of this era, don't open. Nobody suggests opening a door either. The smoke isn't treated as an intrusion into the meeting. It's simply the medium the meeting happens inside of, the way water is the medium a fish happens to swim in. You don't notice the water, you certainly don't notice the smoke. Decisions of real consequence get made in that room. Careers rise and fall in there. Contracts get signed in there. And every one of those moments happens through a slowly thickening blue-gray cloud that everyone present has simply, collectively, agreed not to see. The elevator earns a special mention here, because if the conference room is where the smoke reaches its peak density, the elevator is where it reaches its peak concentration. It's a small sealed metal box, and several smokers might step into it together on their way up from lunch, each contributing their own private cloud to a shared space with absolutely nowhere for any of it to go. 10 floors at the pace of a 1970s elevator is a genuinely long time to spend marinating in a space that size. You step out at your floor a little lighter in the lungs than when you stepped in, and yet the whole ritual holds without a single word of protest, because everyone is standing shoulder to shoulder, facing the doors, adding to the same haze in the same unspoken agreement. To abstain in the elevator would be no different, socially, than abstaining anywhere else in the building, which is to say, it simply isn't done, and it wouldn't occur to anyone to try. The building itself keeps a kind of permanent record of all this in its own surfaces, the way growth rings keep a record inside a tree. The ceiling tiles shift gradually from a bright, hopeful white to a soft, worn nicotine tan, the color of old parchment. The walls develop a faint, sticky film that a fingertip can find if it goes looking. The carpet holds the smell so deeply, so thoroughly, that it's no longer really cigarette smell in anyone's mind at all. It's simply the smell of work. The smell of a job well done. A new employee might notice it, faintly, on their very first day, wrinkle their nose just slightly walking past the file room, and then never notice it again for the rest of their career there, absorbed fully into the atmosphere along with everybody else on the payroll. If there happens to be a single non-smoker on the floor, and there sometimes is, a quiet exception among the crowd, that person has no real recourse. There's no HR department fielding this particular complaint, no language yet built for making it. The air in the building belongs to everyone equally, and everyone else has already decided, collectively and unconsciously, exactly how they intend to spend it. The idea that one person's lungs might have a legitimate opinion about the matter is not merely unaddressed. It hasn't yet occurred to anyone as a question worth asking. Set this beside a modern office, where an employee wanting a cigarette has to ride the elevator down, push through the lobby doors, cross the street, and stand in a small designated corner, feeling faintly apologetic about the whole enterprise, checking their watch to make sure the break doesn't run long. In 1974, no such corner exists because no such apology is owed. The smoker doesn't step outside the building. The smoker, in every sense that matters, owns the building. And the rare fresh air enthusiast is the odd one out, sitting quietly at a hazy desk, saying nothing because there is, for now, nothing yet to say. Sending a child to buy a pack. The house is out of cigarettes, which in most households of this era is treated with roughly the same mild inconvenience as running low on milk. So your mother hands you, a child of maybe 8 or 9, a crumpled dollar bill, tells you the brand, and sends you off to the corner store to fetch her a fresh pack. She writes the brand name on a torn scrap of paper if she's worried you'll forget, though most kids running this errand for the first dozen times have long since memorized it without needing the reminder. She presses the dollar into your palm, tells you to come straight back and not dawdle, and you're off down the sidewalk on a small, serious errand, treated with roughly the same weight in the household as fetching a loaf of bread from the same store. At the counter, the transaction unfolds without a flicker of concern from the clerk. He rings up the pack, makes your change, and depending on how well he knows your family, might slide a piece of penny candy across the counter as a small reward for your trouble, a little bonus for being a loyal customer's loyal errand runner. The idea that he might ask your age, or hesitate, or feel some obligation to refuse the sale altogether belongs to a future that hasn't been written yet. As far as he's concerned, he's providing an ordinary service to a regular household, and you happen to be that household's designated small courier for the day. If the corner store clerk represents the personal touch, the cigarette vending machine represents the fully automated version of the same reality. It stands in the corner of the diner, or the bowling alley lobby, or the bus station waiting room, gleaming with brightly lit brand logos, asking no questions of anyone who approaches it. You feed in your coins, pull the heavy chrome lever with both hands, and the pack thunks down into the collection tray below, ready for you to retrieve. There's no gate, no age verification, no cashier watching over the whole affair, just a machine operating on the simple, unexamined faith that whoever is tall enough to reach the lever presumably has some legitimate reason for doing so. A child who can just barely reach it completes the purchase on their own. A child who can't will simply recruit a taller friend, and between the two of them, the transaction gets done. The whole arrangement rests on one quiet, foundational assumption of the era. Cigarettes in 1974 are not yet regarded as dangerous in any sense that would require shielding children from them. They're simply a product, much like matches or coffee, that adults use regularly and children happen to fetch on their behalf. A 10-year-old walking home with a fresh pack tucked into his jacket pocket isn't carrying anything scandalous in anyone's eyes, least of all his own. He's carrying groceries. The pack rides alongside his own pack of bubble gum from the same trip, distinguished in his mind only by which of the two purchases he actually gets to keep for himself. The distance between this scene and today couldn't be more stark. Selling tobacco to a minor now is treated as a genuinely serious offense. The purchase gated behind photo identification, locked display cases, stern signage bolted above the register, and a clerk who slipped up would very likely lose the job entirely. The vending machines have long since been hauled away, precisely because a machine, however cleverly designed, has never once been able to tell a grown adult from a 9-year-old standing on a friend's shoulders. But in 1974, the errand is simple, the transaction smooth, and you walk the pack home with your candy in the other pocket, proud of a job well done, with absolutely no idea that you've just completed something a modern world would build entire chapters of law specifically to prevent. The Three-Martini Lunch. Midday arrives, and if you're a certain kind of professional man in this decade, lunch means something rather different from a sandwich at your desk. It means the Three-Martini Lunch, and this isn't some furtive indulgence. It's a fully sanctioned, practically ceremonial institution of American business life, complete with its own quiet choreography. You settle into a dim restaurant with heavy white tablecloths, the kind of place where the waiter already knows your usual order before you've even opened the menu. The first martini arrives before the menus do. This one is understood by unspoken consensus to be the warm-up, the icebreaker, the drink over which absolutely nothing of substance gets discussed yet. Small talk about the weather, about the ball game, about nothing at all. The second martini arrives alongside whatever you eventually get around to ordering, and it's during this second drink that the real conversation actually begins, looser now, more expansive, full of the easy, backslapping energy that these lunches are built around. The third is the closer. It's the drink over which the actual deal, whatever it happens to be, gets agreed to, or at least gets agreed to be agreed to later, once everyone's had a chance to sober up slightly and look at the numbers again. Your client doesn't merely tolerate this ritual, he requires it, and requires it sincerely. A man who declines to drink at a business lunch reads, in the social grammar of the era, as stiff, cagey. A man playing his cards too close to his chest to really be trusted. Business in this world runs entirely on relationships, and relationships get built over gin, over shared laughter, over the particular kind of loosened, generous mood that 3 good martinis tend to produce in a person. To turn down the drink is a small, quiet act of professional self-sabotage. The whole lunch functions as an audition in geniality, and sobriety, oddly enough, reads as the bad attitude. And here is the truly beautiful part, from the perspective of anyone actually doing this. The company is delighted to pay for the entire performance. Better still, the tax code smiles on it warmly. The long, boozy lunch is a fully legitimate business expense, deducted without so much as a raised eyebrow from the accountant, an accepted and expected cost of doing business at all. This isn't some clever loophole that a few enterprising executives have discovered and are quietly exploiting. It's the front door. Whole restaurants near every business district in every major city exist chiefly to host this exact ritual. Their entire afternoon trade built around men in ties conducting the nation's actual commerce at a slow, gin-scented crawl. Then comes the return to the office, And this is where the modern mind starts to genuinely wince, because you go back to your desk not merely relaxed, but honestly, functionally impaired, and then you proceed to do actual work things. You sign documents, you take calls, you commit your company to arrangements that you will look at again tomorrow morning with a slight squint and absolutely no memory of having approved. The afternoon isn't really expected to be productive in any meaningful sense. It's for coasting gently on the leftover momentum of lunch, riding out the pleasant blur until it becomes a respectable hour to head home. And home is exactly where you go, 3 martinis deep, out into the thick of rush hour traffic alongside a great many other men who just did precisely the same thing at their own lunches across town. The drive is undertaken with the same cheerful, unshakable confidence that seems to govern every corner of this entire decade, a serene certainty that you personally are fine. You've done this before. You'll do it again tomorrow. Today, of course, the Three-Martini Lunch survives mainly as a punchline, a cautionary bit of nostalgia, and any professional who returned visibly impaired from lunch today would be shown the door before the afternoon was out. But in 1974, you loosen your tie, order the third round, close the deal with a handshake, and drive yourself home through the evening traffic, a productive and thoroughly billable member of the American workforce, utterly unbothered by any of it. A cold can between the knees. That drive home from lunch, as it turns out, comes with its own passenger riding shotgun, and that passenger is an open beer. There's nothing furtive about it, nothing hidden under a jacket or tucked into a paper bag the way it might be handled today. You crack it open right there at a red light, wedge it snugly between your knees because cup holders, as a standard feature of automobile design, simply haven't been invented yet, and the human thigh has proven itself over long practice to be a perfectly serviceable vessel, and you steer one-handed through the evening light, taking the occasional sip whenever you happen to stop at a sign. Passengers pass cans around freely from the back seat. The cooler itself often rides right there in the car with you, restocked from the last gas station, and a road trip in this era gets measured in 2 units simultaneously, miles covered, and how many the cooler managed to hold along the way. The empties collect on the floorboard as the drive goes on, clinking together softly over every bump in the road, a kind of gentle percussion that serves as evidence of a journey well spent. Nobody frets over the little pile down there. It's simply what the floor of a car looks like after a good long drive with friends. There's a genuine etiquette to all of this, believe it or not, one that every driver in this decade seems to have absorbed without ever being formally taught it. You sip at the stop signs, not through the curves. You keep the can low and steady over rough patches in the road. You time your longer pulls to the straightaways, where the wheel needs the least attention. In the mind of the driver doing all this, these little rules amount to genuinely responsible handling, a private code of caution laid carefully over what is, when you step back and look at it plainly, a fundamentally reckless act. The care taken not to spill the beer vastly, almost comically, outweighs the care taken not to crash the car itself. What makes the whole thing feel so relaxed, so entirely unremarkable, is the simple absence of any law worth taking seriously. An open container riding along in the front seat isn't something any officer on the road is actively watching for. It isn't the kind of detail that turns a routine traffic stop into a bad afternoon. It doesn't even register in the driver's own mind as a risk worth filing away. So the beer stays open, the cooler stays stocked, and the drive home simply becomes an extension of whatever pleasant afternoon came before it, the bar, the barbecue, the ball game. A way of keeping the good mood rolling right up until the car pulls into its own driveway, can still in hand. Set this against today, where an open container in a moving vehicle ends a traffic stop in handcuffs, and driving under the influence is understood, correctly, as one of the more genuinely dangerous things a person can do to every other stranger sharing that same stretch of road. The entire modern apparatus of enforcement, of public awareness campaigns, of designated drivers and breathalyzers, simply hasn't been built yet in 1974. So the driver steers one-handed into the setting sun, can wedged snugly between his knees, sipping calmly at every stop sign, entirely convinced that he's being the careful one, a careful man, piloting a moving tavern gently home through a world that hasn't yet decided to mind. Left in the car for just a minute. You need to duck into the bank or the bar or the corner store, and so, quite naturally, you leave the children in the car. Windows cracked an inch or two, engine off, keys tucked safely in your own pocket, and the whole errand mentally filed under what you generously estimate will be 5 minutes and what will, in practice, turn out to be closer to 40. This isn't neglect, not in the vocabulary of 1974. This is simply called parking. The decision barely qualifies as a decision at all. You have an errand to run. The errand goes faster without wrangling 3 kids across a busy parking lot, and so the kids stay behind in the car, which is warm, familiar, and contains them nicely enough for the moment. You crack the windows, tell them to behave, and walk off toward whatever brought you here in the first place, the whole transaction taking up perhaps 4 seconds of actual thought, most of which is devoted to remembering the rest of your grocery list. Left to their own devices, the children run a small civilization of their own back there. The oldest is nominally in charge, an authority that lasts roughly until the first serious dispute over who gets the front seat. They climb around, honk the horn at passers-by, work the turn signals, pretend to drive toward imaginary destinations, and eventually settle into the very specific, familiar boredom of kids waiting in a parked car, eyes fixed on the store entrance for the familiar shape of a returning parent. Time stretches strangely in there. 5 minutes and 40 minutes feel more or less identical from the inside, which is exactly where the whole arrangement quietly goes sideways, because just a minute is a sincerely held belief on the parent's part and almost never an accurate one. There's a line at the register. A neighbor stops to chat. One more item gets remembered on the way to the checkout. The minute becomes 10, becomes 20, becomes the better part of an hour, while back in the car, the afternoon light shifts, the interior slowly warms and the kids drift from bored to restless, to faintly damp with sweat. None of this registers as anything but an ordinary afternoon errand to anyone involved. The heat is the part that reads as genuinely alarming from today's vantage point, because a closed car sitting in direct sun heats up with startling speed, climbing well past the outside temperature within minutes, and a hot day in a sealed car isn't a minor discomfort at all, but a real and serious danger. In 1974, though, this simply isn't on the list of things a parent tracks. The kids are warm, sure, but kids are always complaining about something or other. You roll the windows down a little further and consider the matter handled. And crucially, nobody intervenes, because there is no one whose job or instinct it is to intervene. A stranger walking past a car full of unattended children on a warm afternoon sees nothing worth a second look, certainly nothing worth flagging down help over. The entire social and institutional machinery that would later treat a child alone in a hot car as an emergency worth calling authorities over simply doesn't exist yet in any form. So the kids wait, and you shop, and eventually you return with your bags. And everyone piles back in for the ride home, and it occurs to precisely no one involved that anything at all unusual has happened, because in this particular decade, nothing has. Gone until the streetlights come on. When you're not baking gently in the back seat of a parked sedan, you're simply gone, out the door right after breakfast, with your parents having genuinely no idea where you are for most of the day, until the streetlights flicker on at dusk, which serves as the universal, unspoken signal across every household on the block that it's time to come home before your bones start to show through. The morning send-off is almost ceremonial in how brief it is. You eat, you're told to go outside and find something to do, and the door closes behind you, and that is, more or less, the last conscious thought your parents will give to your specific whereabouts for the better part of the day. There's no plan filed anywhere, no destination on record, nothing beyond the vague and generally accurate expectation that you're somewhere in the general orbit of the neighborhood, doing something with somebody, and that you'll reappear again around dinner time looking appropriately filthy and thoroughly content. Where you actually spend that day would give a modern parent a fairly serious turn. You range for miles well beyond the streets your own parents could reliably name, crossing roads with genuine traffic, following the creek out to see exactly where it empties, prying open a gap in the fence around the half-finished construction site down the road to play king of the dirt pile with a rotating cast of neighborhood kids. The drainage ditch is a particular favorite, a whole concrete world unto itself, occasionally rushing with runoff after a good storm, and danger in the abstract sense is present at basically all times and registered by essentially no one. The social protocol for tracking down your friends is beautifully, almost quaintly analog. You simply walk to their house, knock on the door, and either a parent or an older sibling answers, and you ask plainly whether they're allowed to come out, and either they can or they can't. The whole negotiation conducted entirely between children standing on a doorstep, no adult mediation required or particularly wanted. There are no arranged playdates here, no shared calendars, no parents texting other parents to coordinate pickup times. There's just a kid on a bike showing up unannounced, and the ancient, simple question of whether you're free, and the rest of the day assembles itself organically from there. The streetlight is the one hard rule in an otherwise almost entirely ruleless world, the single thread of parental authority that manages to reach you out there in the wild, wherever you happen to be. When the lights come on, you go home. Not before, unless you happen to be hungry, and not much after, unless you're actively courting trouble. And remarkably, the whole city's worth of children reads the exact same signal off the exact same darkening sky, and turns for home more or less in unison. A loose, scattered, citywide migration triggered entirely by the electric hum of street lamps flickering to life. That any of it worked at all is the genuinely staggering part, looking back. And it worked in large part because it had to, because there was no alternative on offer. Parents couldn't track children who carried no trackers, couldn't call kids who had no phones of their own, couldn't supervise remotely because remotely offered no real window into anything at all. So instead, they trusted the neighborhood, trusted the long stretch of daylight, and trusted the loud voice they'd use at dinner time to call everyone home, and mostly, remarkably, the kids came home just fine. Today, a child wandering for miles unaccompanied would summon genuine concern and quite possibly a call to the authorities, and this whole free-range version of childhood survives mainly now as a fond, slightly disbelieving memory swapped between grandparents. But in 1974, you simply vanish after breakfast into a world entirely your own, and reappear again at dusk, and no one, not even you, most days, could tell you exactly where you'd been. A thumb on the highway. Need to travel farther than your own 2 legs or your bicycle can reasonably carry you. You simply walk to a good spot along the highway on-ramp and stick out your thumb. Hitchhiking in 1974 is a completely ordinary, mainstream way to get from one place to another, practiced by college students home for the holidays, by soldiers making their way back to base, by young people seeing the country on essentially no money at all, and occasionally, believe it or not, by the odd grandmother who simply needs to reach the next town over and sees no particular reason to make a fuss about how she gets there. You stand at your chosen spot with a piece of cardboard scrawled with your destination in thick marker, held up hopefully toward the passing traffic, doing your level best to look friendly and entirely unthreatening, and you wait for the universe to provide. Eventually, mercifully, it usually does. A car slows. A door swings open on a complete unknown. You climb in and the driver is headed your way or close enough to it, and you settle in together for however many miles you end up sharing. And you talk. Genuinely, openly, the way two strangers sealed together in a moving car with nothing else to do tend to talk. You explain where you're headed and why. He tells you about his own life, his job, the town he grew up in, maybe the war he served in, the daughter he's driving to go visit. You will never see this man again in your life, and you both know it perfectly well, which somehow makes the whole conversation unusually, almost startlingly honest. A kind of rolling confessional conducted at 55 miles an hour. Then he drops you at his exit, wishes you good luck, and drives on out of your life entirely, and you stick your thumb back out for the next leg of the journey. The people doing this aren't some fringe subculture, which is really the detail that surprises the modern ear the most. It's students, it's soldiers, it's young adventurers seeing the whole country on a shoestring. It's woven, thoroughly and unremarkably, into the ordinary movement of ordinary people. A driver who passes a hitchhiker by without stopping sometimes feels a small, genuine pang of guilt at having failed to help a fellow traveler along. The danger in all of this is real, and universally, quietly underrated, a low hum running beneath the whole friendly enterprise that nobody lets spoil the general mood. Both parties are, in effect, gambling, the rider betting on the driver betting on the rider, and most of the time, the gamble pays out in nothing worse than good conversation and a free ride toward home. Today, hitchhiking has faded almost to the point of extinction. Viewed now with real suspicion, a practice your grandparents once did that sounds from this distance, faintly reckless to even describe out loud. But in 1974, you stand at the on-ramp with your sign held high and your best hopeful face on, and a car slows and a door opens, and you climb in and roll away down the highway with a total stranger, trusting the road to look after you the way it mostly, remarkably, did. Iron darts over a backyard barbecue. Back at home, the evening settles into a backyard barbecue, and someone inevitably brings out the lawn darts. These are not the harmless plastic kind you might picture from a children's toy aisle today. These are genuinely hefty projectiles, a foot or so of solid weighted plastic and metal, fletched at one end for stability in flight, and tipped at the other with a real, honest metal spike, weighted deliberately so that gravity carries it down point first and buries it satisfyingly into the turf. That's the entire design goal, in fact. The dart is engineered to come down hard enough to stick firmly into a patch of grass, which means, by the same physics, it's engineered to come down hard enough to stick into essentially anything else the grass happens to be wearing at the moment of arrival. And that this was a mass-market product, sold openly on store shelves to ordinary families, is the detail that lands hardest looking back from today. It wasn't some backyard improvisation dreamed up by a careless uncle. It came in a bright box off a shelf, marketed plainly as wholesome outdoor family recreation, purchased by loving, well-meaning parents specifically for their children to enjoy. The gameplay itself is simple and genuinely, wholesomely fun, which is exactly what makes the whole arrangement so effective at what it also, quietly, does. Players take turns lobbing the darts underhand in a high, graceful arc toward a plastic ring laid out on the grass some distance away, trying to land inside it for points. The satisfying part is the arc. The way the dart climbs, hangs for a beat at the top of its flight, and then comes plunging back down with a solid thunk into the lawn. It is, at once, a game of gentle summer evening skill and a structurally incoming volley of aerial spikes. And the backyard barbecue happens to be the natural habitat of both the game and the small children who don't yet understand the concept of a flight path. The darts go up. The kids run around underneath, chasing a dropped hot dog or each other or nothing at all. These two facts share the same patch of lawn, and a toddler chasing a rolling ball can wander straight into the target zone just as a dart begins its descent. And the only thing standing between an ordinary evening and a genuinely terrible one in that moment is luck, and the reflexes of whoever happens to shout, "Heads up," fastest. The adults are aware of the darts falling in theory and manage the whole situation with the same relaxed, unbothered confidence that seems to govern most of this decade. They call out the occasional warning. They tell the kids to stand back a little. They mostly aim well. And the game proceeds on the loose, comfortable assumption that everyone present will simply keep track of where the spikes happen to be at any given moment. An assumption that holds up perfectly well, right up until, on some particular evening somewhere in America, it very memorably doesn't. The reckoning eventually did come, and the game was pulled from store shelves for exactly the reasons anyone today would immediately guess. But on this particular warm evening in 1974, you stand out on the lawn with a hot dog in one hand and an iron-tipped javelin in the other, lofting it high into the summer sky over a yard full of running, laughing children, and everyone cheers. And against all reasonable odds, it is a genuinely lovely time. A paddle kept in the closet. At school, discipline arrives by hand and by wood. Misbehave badly enough, and the principal produces a wooden paddle from the closet, sometimes drilled through with a neat row of holes that every student solemnly believes reduces air resistance, and therefore increases the sting on impact, whether or not that's genuine physics or simply well-worn schoolyard folklore. He swats you across the backside, sometimes in front of the entire class for maximum instructional value, sometimes out in the hallway where the sound carries clearly through the classroom door instead. Teachers, for their part, keep their own personal paddles close at hand, almost the way a sommelier might keep a favorite bottle set aside for special occasions. A real, specific instrument, often a purpose-built wooden board complete with a handle, hanging visibly in the corner of the classroom, or leaning against the office wall as a standing, ever-present reminder of exactly what happens when you step too far out of line. The administration of all this is deliberately, unapologetically public, because the deterrent value is understood to depend entirely on having an audience. You might be paddled at the front of the room while your classmates watch and quietly, silently recalibrate their own upcoming behavior. You might instead be marched out into the hallway, where the sound of it still carries through the door to everyone still seated inside. The humiliation isn't an unfortunate side effect of the punishment. It is, quite deliberately, half the actual lesson, the theory being that shame combined with a sore backside will teach a point that a stern word alone never could. A whole informal culture develops around this over time. Whispered schoolyard legend keeps careful track of which teacher hits hardest and which one is mostly bark with very little actual bite. A particular paddle earns its own nickname. A particular teacher's swing becomes genuine playground mythology, tracked by the students with the same careful attention you'd give to any real, ongoing hazard in your environment, because, quite simply, it is one. And the part that removes any remaining hope of escape is that home offers no real sanctuary from any of it, because your own parents are firmly, unquestioningly on the school's side of the matter. If word of the paddling reaches them, their reaction isn't outrage directed at the school for laying a hand on their child. It's a fresh wave of anger directed squarely at you, for having earned it in the first place, and there's a genuine chance of a second, matching helping waiting for you at home, on the simple theory that if the school found sufficient cause to paddle you, you clearly did something serious enough to warrant a bit of reinforcement. Authority, notably, doesn't stop neatly at the edge of school property, either. If you happen to misbehave 3 houses down the street, the neighbor is considered fully entitled to correct you on the spot, march you by the arm back to your own front door, and report the whole incident directly to your mother, who, in turn, thanks her warmly for the intervention and very likely adds a second round of consequences entirely her own. Every adult on the block functions, in effect, as a deputized enforcer of general childhood behavior. There's no real concept here of not my kid, not my business. It's very much everyone's business, all the time. And you move through the neighborhood inside a whole invisible web of supervisory adults, any one of whom can, and occasionally will, step in without a second thought. Today, corporal punishment in schools has been banned across much of the country entirely, regarded in most places now as a genuine relic that makes people wince to even hear described. But in 1974, you sit up straight in your chair, mind your manners at every turn, and keep one weary eye on the closet where the paddle lives, fully aware that the line between an ordinary school day and a genuinely sore afternoon is thinner, really, than the board itself. Chasing the fog truck down the street. On a warm summer evening, a truck rolls slowly through the neighborhood, engine rumbling low, belching out a thick, billowing white fog into the air behind it. And every child within earshot comes sprinting joyfully out of their own yard to meet it. This is the Mosquito truck, spraying pesticide in a slow, deliberate crawl down every residential street, and running headlong into the cloud behind it is considered, by every kid on the block, a genuinely delightful seasonal game, not unlike playing in a sprinkler that just so happens, on this particular evening, to be full of chemicals instead of plain water. The truck's arrival is a genuine, anticipated event, announced first by the low rumble of its engine somewhere down the block, then by the first pale tendrils of fog creeping up the street ahead of it. Kids come running from every yard at the sound of it, the same way a later generation would come running for the jingle of an ice cream truck, because the fog truck means the best game of the whole evening is just about to begin. It moves at a deliberate crawl precisely, so it can lay down a thick, even blanket of mist, and that slow, steady pace amounts to an open invitation to every child within earshot. The game itself is simply to be inside the cloud, to run straight into its densest part and vanish momentarily from view, to lose sight of your own outstretched hand, to feel the cool, damp mist settle against your face on an otherwise hot night. You chase the truck all the way down the block and back again with your friends, weaving through the fog, shrieking with laughter, playing an entire game of tag in roughly 3 feet of visibility. The mist carries its own distinct chemical sweetness, a smell that lodges itself permanently in memory as simply the smell of a summer evening, bottled and instantly recognizable decades later. The purpose of the truck, of course, is to kill mosquitoes, achieved by dispersing pesticide across the whole neighborhood in a fine, breathable cloud, and that pesticide, notably, does not distinguish between an actual mosquito and a 9-year-old sprinting gleefully straight through the middle of it. You're inhaling it deeply with every excited breath. It's settling into your hair, onto your skin, onto the grass you'll be rolling around on again in 10 minutes. The very quality that makes the fog so much fun in the first place, its thickness, its enveloping density, is exactly the same quality that determines how much of it ends up inside you. The adults preside over the whole scene with total, unbothered ease, waving from their porches, glad the mosquito problem is finally being handled for another week, glad the kids are entertained and out of the house for a while, seeing no contradiction whatsoever between those two small, simultaneous goods. Nobody calls the children back inside. Nobody thinks to cover a face. The spraying is an official, sanctioned municipal service, arriving on its own predictable weekly schedule, and the fact that it's sanctioned is, in itself, all the reassurance anyone in this neighborhood really needs. If it were genuinely dangerous, the thinking goes, surely they wouldn't drive it straight down a residential street at the exact hour the children happen to be outside playing. The full reckoning with what was actually inside that fog came later, and it recolors the whole warm, nostalgic memory rather sharply in hindsight, because the very chemistry that once seemed so festively harmless turned out to be exactly the sort of substance now handled with sealed protective suits and formal evacuation zones. The chasing stopped, eventually, once people fully understood what they'd been chasing. But on this particular evening in 1974, the truck comes rumbling down the road in the golden early evening light, the white cloud unfurling out behind it, and you and every kid you know sprint headlong straight into it, laughing, breathing deeply, chasing summer itself all the way to the end of the street and back, without a single thought in your happy, fog-covered head. A world quietly built from lead. In 1974, lead is, in a very real sense everywhere, woven so thoroughly into daily life that it's practically its own invisible food group. The gasoline burning in every car on the road is leaded, which means the exhaust drifting up from every tailpipe on every city street is quietly seasoning the air with it, settling as a fine, invisible dust over sidewalks, playgrounds, and front yards alike. The busier the road, the thicker that dust lies, and children play in yards right beside those busy roads without a single adult drawing any connection between the traffic rumbling past and the fine gray film settling steadily onto the porch railing. The paint is, if anything, an even more intimate exposure because the paint lives inside the house itself, on exactly the surfaces a small child spends all day touching, mouthing, and being a small child tasting. Leaded paint carries a genuinely sweet flavor, which turns out to be a particularly cruel little detail, because it means toddlers actively seek it out, gnawing with real enthusiasm on painted crib rails, window sills, and flacking baseboards. The paint chips look faintly like candy, and, as it happens, taste like more of it, and a teething baby left alone for a few minutes with a painted railing will happily work away at it with genuine, focused pleasure. The exposures stack from every direction at once, which is really what makes this particular era such a thorough, unintentional experiment. The pipes carrying water into the house may themselves be lead, or joined together with lead solder. It's in the solder sealing the seams of canned food. It's in the paint on certain toys, in the glaze on certain dishes. A child growing up in 1974 is absorbing lead through the air she breathes, the water she drinks, the food she eats, and the walls she happily gnaws on, a genuinely comprehensive dosing, delivered by a world that has, without any particular malice, quietly built the substance into nearly everything around her. And the damage this does is precisely the sort that hides well, which is exactly why the dots stay so stubbornly unconnected for so long. Lead works quietly on the developing brain and nervous system. And the harm it causes doesn't announce itself with a fever or a rash. It shows up diffusely, in ways that are easy enough to attribute to almost anything else. An entire generation absorbs it during the exact years their brains are being actively built. And because the harm is invisible, gradual, and shared universally across the whole population, it simply reads as the ordinary background condition of being alive, rather than as an ongoing, accumulating injury. The unwinding of all this took decades of hard-fought regulation, lead pulled slowly out of gasoline, out of paint, out of pipes, one hard-won rule at a time, until eventually a modern child grows up in an environment actively scrubbed of it, tested for it, and treated with real vigilance around it. But none of that has happened yet in 1974. And so you play out in the roadside haze, drink freely from the kitchen tap, eat happily from the can, and gnaw contentedly on the sweet-tasting window sill, a perfectly happy child marinating in a substance the entire world has, for now, quietly decided is perfectly fine. 18 and entirely legal. You've just turned 18, and in much of the country, that birthday means you can now walk straight into a bar, order a beer, and drink it like the full adult everyone around you agrees you now are. The drinking age varies wildly from one state to the next, and enterprising 18-year-olds living anywhere near a border simply drive across it to whichever neighboring state happens to let them in the door legally. High school seniors toast their own graduation with a perfectly legal round. The whole notion that 21 might one day become the magic number is still off somewhere in an unimagined future. For now, at 18, you can vote for the people who run the country, and you can be handed a uniform and sent off to fight for it. And if the nation trusts you with a ballot and a rifle, the reasoning goes, surely it can trust you with a beer, too. This argument gets made sincerely, and often, and it carries the day across much of the country. Adulthood in this framing arrives as a single complete package, and the drink simply comes bundled in along with everything else. The map, though, is a genuine patchwork because the drinking age gets set state by state, and the states plainly do not agree with each other. One state says 18. The very next one over says 19. The state across the river says 21 flat. And this creates a landscape of wildly different rules, separated by nothing more than an invisible line on a map. A landscape that any teenager living near a state border learns to navigate with real, practiced fluency, knowing exactly which direction to point the car on a Friday night. The bars sitting on the more permissive side of that line do a brisk, steady business, serving the thirsty youth of the stricter state next door, who cross over for the evening and then cross back home again once the night winds down. And that drive home is precisely the part that turns an otherwise harmless patchwork of state laws into a genuine, quantifiable hazard. Because the very same inconsistency that lets an 18-year-old drink legally somewhere also guarantees, reliably, that he'll be back out on the road again afterward. And the stretch of highway connecting the permissive state to the stricter one carries a very particular, very late kind of traffic on weekend nights. Inside the culture of the time, though, none of this reads as any kind of problem at all, because the 18-year-old drinker is simply understood to be an adult doing an entirely adult thing. High school seniors go out together and toast their own graduation over a round of perfectly legal beers. The line between the world of school and the world of the neighborhood bar turns out to be remarkably porous. An 18-year-old moving freely between the two worlds in the very same week without anyone finding it especially strange. The whole system, eventually, did get reeled in rather firmly. The drinking age pulled up to 21 nationwide through a great deal of sustained public pressure, in large part because of exactly this cross-border, drive-home danger that the patchwork had quietly created. A modern bartender checks identification on absolutely everyone now, and would never dream of serving a visible high schooler, legally or otherwise. But in 1974, you turn 18, walk into the bar with your head held high, order your very first fully legal beer, and drink it as the adult everyone around you sincerely agrees you now are, entirely untroubled by a magic number that, for now, simply hasn't been invented yet. A fistful of real explosives. It's the 4th of July, and someone has just handed a 12-year-old a genuine fistful of serious explosives. Not sparklers, not the gentle fizzing fountains a modern Independence Day tends to run on cherry bombs and M80s. The kind of thing that can, quite genuinely, take off a finger if handled carelessly, distributed to children with little more than a casual instruction to go outside and blow something up, and be careful about it. You spend the whole holiday lighting fuses and running, detonating your little stockpile in mailboxes, in the shallow end of the neighbor's pond, under empty cans that go rocketing improbably high into the summer air. The adults are around somewhere, mildly supervising between beers of their own. The entire neighborhood by early evening sounds like a distant, ongoing war. Fingers are occasionally lost. Eyebrows get singed with some regularity. And every single kid on the street still considers it, without exception, the greatest day of the entire year. The explosives in question are not the gentle fare of a modern 4th. A cherry bomb is a genuine, honest little bomb, round, red, packed with enough powder to do real and lasting damage. The M80 is its bigger, meaner cousin, loud enough to rattle windows a full block away. Neither is designed to sparkle prettily or fizz gently in the driveway. Both are designed to explode with real force, and both are handed to children with roughly the same casual ease as a bag of candy. The instructions, such as they exist at all, amount to go outside and be careful, which a 12-year-old, quite naturally, hears mostly as go outside. So out you go, pockets bulging with your own small arsenal, a book of matches or a slow-burning punk stick clutched in one hand, ready to conduct the day's experiments. You learn the timing of a fuse strictly through trial and error, which is exactly as alarming as it sounds when you say it out loud. You light it, you throw it, you run, and mostly the physics works out exactly as you'd hoped, And occasionally, on some memorable afternoon, it very much does not, and the day quietly acquires its casualties. The adults preside over all of this from a comfortable distance, drinks in hand, tracking the children with roughly a third of their actual attention. Many of them lit these very same fuses at this very same age themselves, and bear the small faded scars to prove it, so a certain baseline amount of risk reads to them as simply part of the holiday. A singed eyebrow is a rite of passage worth a good laugh later. A close call becomes a story told for years. As long as nobody is screaming for real, the supervision stays loose, and the powder keeps flowing freely from hand to hand. The distance between that afternoon and today is a matter of both law and nerve, because serious consumer explosives of this kind have been heavily restricted for decades now, and the very notion of arming a 12-year-old with them would make a modern parent go visibly pale. But in 1974, you spend the entire 4th of July wreathed in gunpowder smoke, hands blackened, ears ringing pleasantly, lighting fuses and sprinting for cover, and you go to bed that night entirely, gloriously certain that no single day in human history has ever quite matched this one. A country briefly, cheerfully naked. There is, in this particular year, a genuine craze sweeping the entire nation, and that craze is running stark naked through public places, seemingly for no better reason than that it feels, at the time, uproariously funny. Streaking is everywhere across football fields mid-play, through college campus quads, past bewildered city council meetings, occasionally even into live television broadcasts, and the general public reaction is delighted, helpless laughter rather than anything resembling a squad car. It is, in this moment, a full-blown fad, a strange shared bonding experience, practically a rite of passage. And the plain, bare truth of it is that in 1974, you could sprint stark naked past a marching band at a Saturday football game and walk away treated less like a defendant than a minor folk hero. The whole phenomenon seems to arrive from nowhere and spread like a genuinely happy contagion, campus to campus, each new incident trying to outdo the last. A single streaker becomes a small group, becomes a full mass event, dozens of bare bodies dashing at once across a college quad in broad daylight to the delighted cheers of everyone watching from the lawn. It isn't quite protest, and it isn't quite performance art, and it is certainly not, by any measure, sensible. It's simply a shared joke that the whole country appears to have decided, more or less simultaneously, to be in on together. The venues escalate right alongside the craze itself, because part of the appeal is clearly the sheer audacity of the stage chosen. A football game, mid-play, the streaker cutting straight across the field between the two teams. A live television broadcast, a bare figure darting behind an unsuspecting news anchor. A solemn public ceremony interrupted by a cheerfully naked sprinter waving at the assembled dignitaries. The bigger and more formal the occasion, the funnier the sudden intrusion feels to everyone watching, and so streakers actively seek out precisely the moments where nudity is least expected and most gleefully disruptive. The crowd's response is really the part that dates the whole episode most sharply, because by and large, the crowd simply loves it. People point and howl with laughter. They applaud outright. They tell the story for weeks afterward at dinner parties. The streaker isn't cast as any kind of menace, but as a genuine folk hero, a spirited soul who did something wonderfully outrageous and got clean away with it. And the getting away with it part is central to the whole appeal, because the authorities of the moment mostly treat the whole business as a harmless prank rather than any kind of real crime. An officer might give a half-hearted chase, more for the entertainment value of the spectacle than out of any genuine intent to ruin the young man's afternoon. The participants come from every corner of otherwise respectable society, which is precisely what makes this a genuine national craze rather than some fringe stunt confined to one wild campus. It's the honor student. It's the fraternity brother. It's the young professional out celebrating a promotion. And on at least one memorable, oft-retold occasion, it's somebody's own uncle. The naked sprint becomes, for a brief window, a shared national right, a thing you did once, a story you'll happily tell at reunions decades later, a small act of harmless rebellion that briefly bonded a whole generation together in mutual, giggling complicity. That window closed firmly, eventually, because the same act performed today would end not in laughter, but in a genuine arrest, formal charges, and a lasting mark on a person's record. The whole surrounding culture around public nudity having hardened considerably in the decades since. But in 1974, the craze is riding at its absolute peak. The country briefly and rather inexplicably delighted by the sight of its own citizens sprinting bare through its most dignified public spaces. And you could, if the mood struck you and your nerve held firm, dash naked past a marching band straight into local legend, waving cheerfully the whole way through. A little pill for the whole day. Feeling a little sluggish, a little soft around the middle, your doctor has just the thing waiting in his desk drawer. Amphetamines get prescribed cheerfully, and often for weight loss, for a general lack of energy, for tired housewives who simply need a bit of help powering through an overloaded day. These little pills are handed out with a level of enthusiasm that would raise every eyebrow in a modern pharmacy. You take one to slim down, another to keep up with the housework, and somehow, by 4 in the morning, you find yourself vacuuming the living room ceiling with an almost unsettling level of focus and dedication. They're marketed, plainly and cheerfully, as a modern miracle, a shortcut straight to the figure you want and the energy you've been missing, all in one small tablet. The idea that any of this might one day be understood as a genuine problem is only just barely beginning to dawn on anyone anywhere. For now, you feel fantastic. Jittery and thin and wired, roughly in that order, and none of the three feels like a warning sign. Getting the prescription in the first place is remarkably easy, because the whole exchange is framed as ordinary helpful medicine rather than anything requiring particular caution. You mention to your doctor that you'd like to lose a few pounds, or that you've been feeling worn down lately, or that you simply can't seem to keep up with the house and the kids and everything else life keeps throwing at you. And out comes the prescription pad, almost before you finish the sentence. The pill gets presented as a perfectly sensible modern solution to a perfectly ordinary modern problem, handed over with roughly the same casual confidence you'd expect for something to settle a cough. There's a pill for the weight and a pill for the tiredness, and it turns out, conveniently, that it's the very same pill. The intended customer, more than anyone else, is the overwhelmed housewife, and the advertising of the era knows this with real precision. Magazine ads speak directly to the woman who has too much on her plate and not nearly enough energy left to handle it, promising she can be slimmer and peppier and more thoroughly on top of things, all at once, all from the same small bottle. The pill gets sold as the answer to a whole life's worth of accumulated pressure, a small daily lift that lets her keep the entire household spinning smoothly while also, not incidentally, fitting back into last summer's dresses. The effect, of course, is exactly what an amphetamine reliably does, and the era experiences this as a genuine bonus rather than any kind of red flag. You feel terrific. Boundless energy floods in. The pounds come off steadily, mostly because you're simply not hungry anymore and you never quite stop moving long enough to sit down and eat properly. You clean the entire house at a tremendous, satisfying clip, and then, finding it spotless already, you clean it again just for the pleasure of the motion. The focus feels intense, the drive feels relentless, and at 4 in the morning, wide awake and scrubbing the ceiling with total, cheerful commitment, you feel more capable than you've ever felt in your entire life. The trouble hiding quietly inside all that borrowed energy is only just beginning to be understood dimly around the edges. The jitters, the sleepless nights stacking up one after another, the crash that follows once the pill wears off, the growing, uncomfortable realization that you now need it just to feel like yourself at all, and the way the dose seems to creep steadily upward over time without anyone quite noticing when it happened. All of this is quietly, genuinely happening, but the framework needed to see it clearly as an actual problem simply isn't firmly in place yet. For now, it reads as nothing more than the modest price of feeling wonderful, and feeling wonderful, in this particular moment, seems more than worth a little jitter. The reckoning eventually arrived in full, and these pills were pulled back hard, reclassified and tightly controlled, until a modern amphetamine prescription is treated as a genuinely serious medical matter, handled with real caution, and never, ever handed out casually for a few stubborn vanity pounds. But in 1974, you leave the doctor's office with a cheerful little bottle tucked into your purse, a modern miracle rattling gently against your keys, and you take one with your morning coffee and feel the whole day open up bright and fast and full of energy, thin, wired, and entirely certain that medicine has finally, at long last, solved absolutely everything. Real medicine on the open shelf. Got a nasty cough? In many parts of the country, you can simply walk into a pharmacy and pick up a bottle of cough syrup with a genuine, honest punch behind it. The kind that would today require a locked cabinet, a signature on a form, and a fairly stern look from the pharmacist before you could carry it home. You reach for it the same way you'd reach for a bag of throat lozenges, treating a bad cold with a confident spoonful of something that happens to be surprisingly, remarkably effective. The clerk rings it up right alongside your gum and your evening paper. It works wonders on the cough itself, and coincidentally, it works a fair bit on your general outlook for the rest of the afternoon as well. The syrup sits right out on the open shelf among all the ordinary cold remedies, entirely unremarkable to look at, its actual potency disclosed plainly on the label to anyone who happens to bother reading it closely, which turns out to be almost nobody. You've got a chest cold, you want it gone, and this happens to be the one bottle that genuinely works, so this is the bottle you buy. There's no conversation required with the pharmacist, no form to sign, no age to prove at the register. It's a cold remedy, purchased exactly the way any other cold remedy would be, carried home in a paper sack right alongside the rest of your ordinary errands. The reason it works so remarkably well is, of course, precisely the same reason it would later be locked away behind glass. The active ingredient quieting that cough so effectively is a genuine opiate, and a genuine opiate does considerably more than simply quiet a cough. It takes the edge off the entire afternoon. The cold retreats a little into the background, the body's aches soften, and a pleasant, unhurried looseness settles gently over everything. You take it sincerely for the cough, and the rest arrives as an uninvited but not entirely unwelcome guest riding along behind it. The sheer casualness of the whole purchase is really the heart of the matter. The way something this genuinely powerful sits openly on a shelf beside the throat lozenges and the cough drops, treated by absolutely everyone as though there's no meaningful difference at all between the three. The clerk rings it up between your pack of gum and your magazine without so much as a flicker of hesitation. It sits at eye level on the shelf. A teenager could walk in and buy a bottle for under $1 with no questions asked whatsoever. The whole apparatus of caution that a substance like this would eventually demand simply hasn't been built around it yet, and its real power sits there in plain, entirely unguarded sight. The room for genuine misuse hiding inside all this is obvious enough in hindsight, and largely unexamined at the time, because a product this potent and this freely available is bound to be used by a certain quiet minority for rather more than just coughs, and it quietly is, by people who have discovered along the way that the cure feels considerably nicer than the illness ever did. But the framework that would eventually name that a genuine problem is, for now, only faintly sketched in, easy enough to overlook entirely. For most ordinary people, it really is just cough syrup, cheap, effective, unremarkable, and the fact that it happens to be something rather more than that as well is a matter almost nobody is tracking closely. That faint outline eventually got traced over in much heavier ink. The potent syrups moved behind the pharmacy counter, and then behind lock and signature both, until today, obtaining anything remotely comparable requires a full prescription, a careful paper trail, and a pharmacist's genuinely watchful eye. But in 1974, you walk into the drugstore with a rotten cough, pluck the good bottle straight off the open shelf, pay for it beside your pack of gum, and take a generous spoonful once you're home, and the cough eases, and the whole afternoon goes soft and warm and faintly golden. And you think only, quite sincerely, that they really do make excellent cold medicine these days. A fire in every backyard. Garbage Day in 1974 isn't a truck rumbling down the street at all. It's a rusty metal drum standing in your own backyard, into which goes everything: paper, plastic, food scraps, the occasional genuine mystery item. And then, once it's reasonably full, the whole pile gets set gloriously alight. Every household on the block has its own small inferno going most evenings, sending up a steady column of thick black smoke that drifts lazily over the fence and settles directly into the neighbor's clean laundry line. Nobody complains, because everybody is quietly burning their own barrel right back at everyone else. The barrel itself is as permanent a fixture of the backyard as the clothesline or the garden shed, usually an old 55-gallon drum, gone rusty and warped from years of accumulated heat, standing in one corner of the property above a permanent scorch mark burned deep into the grass beneath it. Into it goes the week's entire household refuse, sorted by no organizing principle whatsoever, because sorting simply isn't a concept that applies here. Paper, food scraps, plastic packaging, whatever else the household happened to produce that week, all tumbled together to await the match. The burning itself is treated as a small, satisfying chore, often handed off to whichever family member happens to genuinely enjoy tending a fire, which turns out to be most of them. You touch a match to it and stand back to watch it catch, flames climbing steadily up through the layered garbage, thick black smoke rising in a steady column overhead. A garden hose sits coiled nearby, present less out of any real safety concern than out of the plain practical knowledge that a barrel fire in a particularly dry season tends to develop its own ideas about where it might like to spread next. Tending the evening barrel becomes a quiet, near-universal ritual up and down the entire street. The smoke is really where the whole arrangement announces its true character, because you're not burning clean, seasoned firewood here. You're burning a full week's worth of household garbage, and household garbage burns filthy. The column rising from the barrel is black and greasy and distinctly chemical, thick with whatever the melting plastics and packaging happen to give off as they smolder, and it does not, whatever anyone might prefer, stay politely confined to your own yard. It drifts. It rolls lazily over the fence and settles directly into the neighbor's freshly washed laundry, hanging there on the line, quietly absorbing the fragrance of your entire week's trash. The reason nobody objects is, in its own way, beautifully simple. Everyone on the street is doing exactly the same thing, which makes any complaint instantly, transparently hypocritical. Your neighbor can hardly fault your smoke while his own barrel happens to be smoldering away at that exact same moment, seasoning your own laundry line in return. The whole neighborhood exists, in effect, in a state of ongoing mutual low-grade smoke exchange, each yard contributing its own small share to a shared evening haze that everyone breathes in and no one in particular owns. The whole practice was eventually banned across most of the country entirely, once the full understanding took hold of exactly what had been drifting up in all that greasy black smoke and settling quietly into lungs and soil and bedsheets alike. And today, burning household trash openly in your own backyard would summon both the fire department and a formal fine in short order. But in 1974, you carry the week's garbage out to the rusty drum as the sun goes down, touch a match to it, and stand back with the hose coiled nearby just in case, watching your refuse rise into the evening sky as one thin black column among a great many others across the neighborhood, entirely certain that this is simply how it's done. A roadside made entirely of trash. As you cruise down the highway later, beer still wedged between your knees, you finish off a bag of chips and do the perfectly natural thing with the empty wrapper, fling it straight out the open window into the passing scenery. So does everyone else on the road around you. The shoulders of America's highways have become a rolling collage of crumpled cans, torn wrappers, and cigarette butts, because the entire concept that the outdoors might not, in fact, be one enormous shared trash simply hasn't fully landed yet in the public imagination. You empty the car's little ashtray directly onto the pavement at a red light. You toss an empty bottle casually into the roadside ditch without a second thought. There are, admittedly, a few earnest television commercials just beginning to air, gently suggesting that perhaps, possibly, this isn't the most ideal approach, and you find them, if you're honest, just a touch preachy. The whole gesture is automatic and genuinely thoughtless, in the most literal sense of the word, requiring no actual thought at all, because the alternative simply hasn't yet been established as any kind of expected norm. You're finished with the wrapper. The window's right there, so out it goes, fluttering gently off into the grass beside the road. Nobody ever specifically taught you to do otherwise. The car itself has no designated bag for trash, no particular spot to stash it, and the road stretching out beyond your window is vast and constantly moving and seems, from the driver's seat, to swallow whatever you give it without any visible consequence whatsoever. So you give it everything. The cumulative result, multiplied across millions of drivers all doing precisely the same thing day after day, is a landscape thoroughly festooned with litter, though you barely even register it anymore, because it's simply become the ordinary texture of the roadside. The shoulders and ditches of every highway in the country are strewn evenly with cans and bottles and fast food wrappers, and a near-permanent light snow of cigarette butts. A continuous, unbroken ribbon of refuse tracing the edge of every road in America. It's simply what the edge of a road looks like, and as far as anyone driving today can personally remember, it has always looked exactly like this. The car ashtray ritual at the red light is its own small piece of the puzzle, a tidiness inside the car that somehow doubles as littering just outside it, because you keep your own vehicle clean precisely by making the public road that much dirtier. You pull up to the light, pop open the ashtray, tip its little heap of butts and ash out onto the waiting pavement below, and close it back up again, satisfied that your car is now respectably fresh. The logic holds together perfectly well inside the cabin, and falls apart entirely the moment anyone actually stops to consider the pavement, which, notably, nobody in the car is doing. The first faint stirrings of a genuinely different attitude are only just beginning to appear, and they are not, at this stage, especially welcome. Earnest commercials air here, and they're suggesting that perhaps the whole country shouldn't be treated as one giant shared receptacle, that the litter really does add up over time, that someone, somewhere, ought to actually care, and the reception from a public still happily flinging chip bags out their windows amounts to little more than a mild, dismissive eye roll. The message reads, to most ears, as preachy, a bit much, the fussing of people who take things a shade too seriously. The idea is out there, floating around, but it hasn't yet taken hold, hasn't yet turned into the automatic reflex of simply holding onto your own trash until you find a proper bin. That reflex did eventually take hold, and powerfully so, through years of sustained public campaigns, new laws, and a genuine, gradual shift in what people came to find socially acceptable. Until today, tossing trash out of a moving car window is both flatly illegal and genuinely socially shocking, the kind of thing that reliably draws honks and hard glares from every direction. But in 1974, you finish your chips at highway speed, ball up the empty bag, and send it sailing out into the warm summer air without so much as a flicker of hesitation. One more small, cheerful contribution to the endless litter of the American roadside, entirely convinced that the great outdoors can easily take it. Rifles riding in the school parking lot. Out in rural America, autumn arrives, and the high school parking lot fills up each morning with pickup trucks, and in the rear window of a fair number of them sits a rack proudly displaying a hunting rifle. Boys drive themselves to school, plan to hunt on the way home once the last bell rings, and think absolutely nothing of it because deer season, as everyone here understands perfectly well, waits for no algebra class. Nobody panics at the sight of it. Nobody locks anything down. The gun riding in the truck is as unremarkable a fixture as the lunchbox sitting on the seat beside it, or the bike rack out by the gymnasium door. The idea that this arrangement might one day trigger any kind of national emergency would strike absolutely everyone in this parking lot as genuinely baffling. It's simply Tuesday, and there happen to be deer in the county. The setting here is thoroughly rural, and the surrounding culture is agricultural through and through, and in that particular world, a rifle is understood as a piece of entirely ordinary equipment, no more sinister, in anyone's mind, than a fishing rod or a decent pair of work gloves. It's a tool used for hunting, for managing pests out on the family farm, for the plain practical business of country living generally. And a teenage boy who hunts regularly simply owns one as a matter of course, the same way he owns a decent jacket for cold mornings. So when he drives himself to school in the family truck on a crisp October morning, the rifle rides exactly where it always rides, in the rack mounted across the back window, plainly visible to anyone who happens to walk past in the lot. The reason it's there specifically on a school day is entirely, mundanely practical. The hunting happens around the schooling rather than instead of it. Deer season is officially open, the daylight is already getting shorter by the week, and the boy fully intends to hunt on his drive home, while there's still enough light left in the sky to make it worthwhile. So the rifle comes along with him in the morning, because there simply isn't time to swing by home first and collect it before the light fails. The gun sitting in the school parking lot isn't a statement of any kind, and it certainly isn't meant as any kind of threat. It's logistics, plain and simple, the exact same reason his fishing gear sometimes rides back there too, or his work boots, or a spare bag of feed for the cattle. The reaction from everyone else around him is really the most striking part of the whole picture, because there genuinely isn't one. Nobody notices the rifles in any alarmed way whatsoever. The teachers park their own cars right beside those same trucks every single morning. The principal walks past the lot on his way in without a second glance. The other students think nothing of it at all, because they've grown up in exactly the same world, and a good half of them have a rifle riding in their own family truck at that very moment too. A rack full of hunting rifles scattered across the school lot is simply part of the ordinary autumn scenery, every bit as unremarkable as the turning leaves on the ground or the light frost silvering the windshields at dawn. The trust underneath all of it is total and entirely unexamined, a shared, unspoken assumption that a rifle sitting in a truck is a tool resting in the hands of someone who knows perfectly well how to use it, and who has no earthly reason to use it here on school grounds among his own classmates. The guns simply stay in the trucks all day. Nothing ever happens, year after year, season after season. The boys drive themselves to school armed for the afternoon's planned hunt, and the rifles simply ride along quietly and go home again with them at the end of the day, and the whole arrangement causes no trouble whatsoever, because in this specific world, at this specific moment in time, it genuinely doesn't occur to a single person present that it ever would. The distance between that particular parking lot and the world of today is measured in a national transformation, almost too heavy and too complicated to fit comfortably into a single gentle bedtime story. The whole relationship between American schools and firearms having shifted over the following decades in ways that make the casual rifle rack of 1974 feel like a scene pulled from an entirely vanished world. But on this particular crisp autumn morning, it's simply that, a crisp autumn morning in a small country town, the trucks lined up neatly in the lot with their racks visible in the rear windows. The boys heading inside toward first period algebra with the whole afternoon's hunt already mapped out in their heads, and the deer themselves somewhere out past the edge of town, entirely unaware that school lets out promptly at 3. A keg appears in the basement. The parents have gone away for the weekend, and by Saturday evening, the teenagers have quietly taken over the entire basement, and a keg has appeared down there as if summoned by simple word of mouth. News of it spreads through the school hallways all week. Cars begin filling up the lawn and spilling out along the curb, and by nightfall, a full-blown high school party is roaring away under a single flickering bear bulb and a steadily thickening haze of cigarette smoke. Sometimes, remarkably, the parents are even home upstairs the whole time, having made a deliberate decision that if the kids are determined to drink one way or another, it's probably better that they do it right here, in the basement, where at least somebody can keep half an eye on the general proceedings, rather than out in a parked car somewhere or scattered across some dark, unsupervised field. So they hand over the basement for the evening, turn the television up a notch or two to drown out the worst of the noise below, and let the party proceed downstairs largely undisturbed. The notion that a parent might actually face genuine legal consequences for allowing any of this simply isn't part of anybody's calculation yet. It's just a party, and as far as the neighborhood is concerned, everyone's more or less invited. The basement itself is the natural venue for an evening like this, a semi-finished space of dark wood paneling, a collection of cast-off furniture nobody quite wanted upstairs anymore, and a bare concrete floor tucked safely below the main house, where the noise gets muffled and the inevitable mess stays contained. Down there, out of immediate sight of the street, the party assembles itself with the sheer speed and efficiency of teenage word of mouth. Someone knows someone who can reliably get the keg. Someone else's parents happen to be conveniently out of town this particular weekend. The location spreads by phone call and by whispered hallway conversation, and by the time night properly falls, the otherwise quiet suburban house has become, for one evening at least, the undisputed center of the entire weekend's social universe. The scene that develops downstairs is a full high school party in every particular you'd expect. Cars parked haphazardly across the front lawn and spilling up along the street in both directions. The basement itself packed shoulder to shoulder with kids. Music turned up loud. That single bare bulb overhead doing very little against the general fog of cigarette smoke steadily filling the room. The keg sits in one corner like the gravitational center of the whole event, a perpetual line of red plastic cups forming and reforming around it all night long. It is loud and crowded and just a little chaotic, and to absolutely everyone present, it feels genuinely, thoroughly essential. Precisely the kind of night that will still be getting relived in the school cafeteria for weeks afterward. The detail that dates the whole scene most sharply is that occasionally present parent upstairs, the mother or father who is home the entire time, by their own deliberate choice, while all of this unfolds directly below their own living room floor. The reasoning behind it is a very specific artifact of this particular era. The kids are almost certainly going to drink regardless of what any adult says or does, so it's genuinely better in this view that they do it here in the basement, under a roof where a responsible grown-up is at least reasonably nearby, rather than out in a car somewhere, or in a field, unsupervised entirely. So the parent surrenders the basement for the evening, turns the television volume up to drown out the worst of the bass thumping through the floorboards, and lets the party carry on below, genuinely satisfied that this counts, in its own way, as responsible supervision. The thing entirely absent from this whole calculation is any real sense of legal consequence, because the legal framework that would eventually make a parent criminally liable for underage drinking happening under their own roof simply hasn't been built yet, not in any form that's registered in the public consciousness. The parent sitting upstairs isn't weighing a potential lawsuit or an arrest, or a civil suit from some other family. They're weighing noise against basic safety and coming down in their own minds firmly on the side of a reasonably controlled environment. The idea that the law might have a very forceful, very specific opinion about that keg sitting in their basement simply isn't part of the thinking at all. It's a social judgment being made, not a legal risk being calculated. That changed rather sharply, of course, with the later arrival of social host liability laws and a considerably hardened public attitude toward adults who knowingly furnish alcohol to minors, so that today, a parent who knowingly hosts a basement keg party faces genuinely serious legal peril, and most parents know it well before the question ever arises. The calculation today is an entirely different one. But in 1974, the parents are upstairs with the television turned up, or else safely out of town altogether. The basement is packed and loud and thick with smoke. The keg keeps flowing steadily under that one flickering bulb, and everyone present, teenagers and reasonably tolerant parents alike, considers the whole thing simply an ordinary Saturday night. 12 years old behind the wheel. Out on the farm, and often for a fair distance beyond its fence line as well, the driving age is treated less as a fixed legal number and more as a loose suggestion, largely dependent on whether or not your legs happen to reach the pedals comfortably. 12-year-olds routinely pilot pickup trucks down the county's dirt roads, run genuine errands into the nearest town, and haul equipment back and forth across the fields, often with a cigarette dangling from one hand and the radio turned up loud. Dad taught you to drive on the tractor back when you were around 8, so by comparison, graduating to the family truck feels less like a transgression and more like a well-earned promotion. The county sheriff, for his part, knows exactly whose kid you are, and simply lifts a hand off his own steering wheel in greeting as you rumble past him, underage and entirely unlicensed, kicking up a long trail of dust behind you. Out here, everybody learns early. The road is empty most of the time. The cows standing in the field certainly don't judge, and nobody, absolutely nobody, is coming around to ask for your paperwork. The farm is where the whole modern notion of a fixed driving age quietly dissolves, mostly because the farm itself runs entirely on machinery, and that machinery genuinely needs operating, and there simply aren't enough grown adults around at any given moment to handle every single task themselves. A child who can reach the pedals comfortably is, quite simply, a child who can be genuinely useful, and so useful they become, learning to drive not in some classroom or a supervised parking lot, but out in an open field, at an age when a city kid several states away is still riding a bicycle with a banana seat and training wheels barely retired. Competence out here arrives early because it plainly has to. The whole progression feels perfectly logical from the inside, moving from one machine to the next in a natural sequence. You start out on the tractor around age 8 or so, because the tractor moves slowly, the open field is forgiving of small mistakes, and there's genuine, useful work waiting to be done regardless. Once you've mastered that, the pickup truck becomes the obvious next step, faster, more maneuverable, but fundamentally the very same proposition at heart. A machine you steer carefully down a road. By the time you're 12, handling the truck feels like a matter of simple routine, and honestly, it feels less like breaking any rule and more like a genuine graduation, clear proof that you've been trusted with something more. The uses, notably, are entirely practical, and entirely real, never joyriding, always chores. You haul equipment steadily from one end of the property to the other. You drive into town for a spare part or a fresh bag of feed. You pilot the truck down the county road with the radio blaring and quite possibly a cigarette going too, because at 12, out here, you're functionally already halfway grown. The truck is simply a tool you've been handed because it makes the ordinary daily work of the farm genuinely possible, and you use it exactly the way an adult would, because within the working economy of the farm itself, you effectively are one, chores and all. The law's response to any of this amounts in practice to no response at all. Everyone in the county knows everyone else. They know whose kid you are, and whose truck that happens to be, and they know perfectly well that you're driving underage and unlicensed, and they know exactly why. The sheriff passes you on the road most afternoons and simply lifts a hand in greeting, then keeps on driving, because there is genuinely nothing here he considers any kind of real problem worth stopping for. The roads themselves are largely empty. The arrangement is essentially universal across every farm in the county, and actually enforcing the strict letter of the law out here would mean effectively shutting down half the working farms in the entire region. The wider world beyond the farm eventually asserted its own rules more forcefully: proper licensing, fixed age limits, real enforcement, reaching gradually even out to these quiet back roads. So that today, a 12-year-old sitting behind the wheel of a pickup truck on any public road is treated as a genuine, serious problem, regardless of how empty that road happens to be or how genuinely capable the child driver actually is. But in 1974, you rumble contentedly down the dirt road in the family pickup, radio blaring, a trail of dust rising steadily behind you, 12 years old and entirely, comfortably at home behind that wheel, while the sheriff waves and the cows watch on without a shred of judgment, and nobody anywhere is coming to ask for your license. A front door that never locks. And at the very end of this long, cheerfully hazardous day, you finally come home to a house that has, quite genuinely, been left unlocked since roughly the day it was first built. Nobody in this family locks the front door, ever. The neighbors simply walk in without bothering to knock first. The family car sits parked in the driveway with the keys left casually in the ignition, and on a cold winter morning, the engine sometimes runs entirely unattended for a good 10 minutes while it warms up. An open invitation that, remarkably, no one in the whole neighborhood ever seems to accept. Trust, quite simply, is the default setting for the entire street. You leave your bicycle lying out on the front lawn overnight. You leave your bedroom windows cracked open on a warm evening. You leave the front and back doors standing wide open on a summer afternoon, and you sleep soundly through the night regardless, secure in a level of casual, everyday openness that a person from today would find either genuinely heartwarming or thoroughly alarming, or, quite possibly, both at once. The unlocked door isn't some careless oversight or a rare lapse in judgment. It's simply the ordinary, permanent condition of the house itself. A door that technically locks in theory, and yet never actually does in practice, because there has simply never once been a reason for it to. The whole family comes and goes freely without ever bothering to carry a house key. The lock mechanism itself, if anyone even bothered to go looking for it, would likely be stiff and half-rusted from years of complete disuse. The house stands open to the street, effectively all day and all through the night, and this causes absolutely no anxiety whatsoever in anyone living there, because the entire underlying premise of locking up in the first place rests on a particular fear that this street, this neighborhood, simply doesn't carry. The neighbors, accordingly, treat your home as something close to semi-public space, walking straight in through the front door without any knock at all, to borrow a cup of sugar, to return a tool left behind last week, to see if anyone happens to be around for a bit of coffee and conversation. This isn't experienced as any kind of intrusion at all. It's a courtesy, really, a small sign of genuine closeness between families. It's simply the ordinary traffic of a street where everybody knows everybody else by name, and doors have become, in practice, little more than a polite formality. You do the exact same thing at their house without a second thought. The knock, when it does happen, is generally reserved strictly for actual strangers, and there simply aren't very many of those around, and the few there are get noticed immediately by the whole block. The family car takes that same underlying trust and pushes it, if anything, a full step further, into what would look from today's vantage point like open, active provocation. The keys live permanently in the ignition, because where else, genuinely, would they live? And on a cold morning, someone goes outside, starts the engine, and simply leaves it running quietly in the driveway to warm up properly while they duck back inside for a cup of coffee. The car sits there for a solid 10 minutes or more, unlocked, running, entirely unattended, keys sitting right there in plain view. And nobody, not once, ever takes it. The invitation gets extended in effect every single morning, and it's never once accepted because the sort of person who would accept it simply doesn't live anywhere on this particular street. The bicycle left out on the lawn completes the whole picture nicely, right alongside the open windows and the propped open doors, and all the other small, unguarded arrangements of a life lived without much genuine fear of one's own neighbors. Things get left out here, and things simply stay exactly where they were left. The whole neighborhood operates on a shared, default assumption of good faith so complete and so total that actively securing your own belongings would feel, if anything, almost mildly insulting. A quiet suggestion that your neighbors might be the sort of people who'd actually take something that wasn't theirs, which they emphatically, obviously are not. Whether all of this amounted to genuine innocence, or simple good luck, or perhaps just a smaller, more tightly knitted world than the one that came after, is genuinely hard to say for certain from this distance. But it didn't fully survive the years that followed, as locks and alarms and a broader, more generalized wariness crept in gradually over the following decades, until the unlocked front door became, eventually, little more than a quaint story that grandparents tell at the dinner table, half disbelieved by their own grandchildren. The whole default setting quietly flipped over time from trust toward caution. But in 1974, you walk into your own unlocked house at the very end of this long and thoroughly hazardous day, past the family car idling trustfully in the driveway and the bicycle lying out untouched on the front lawn, and you settle in comfortably for the night behind a door you won't bother locking, secure in a whole world that hasn't yet learned to be quite so afraid of itself. So there you have it, a single, perfectly ordinary day in 1974, in which you rattled loose in the back of a station wagon, breathed an office thick with drifting cigarette smoke, chased a cloud of pesticide fog gleefully down the street for the sheer fun of it, and came home, at the very end of it all, to a door that never once locked. You lit fireworks you could barely hold steady in one hand, sipped a beer on the long drive home, and trusted an entire neighborhood's worth of grown adults to help raise you, firm hand and wooden paddle included. It's something of a small miracle that anyone made it safely all the way through to 1975. And yet, remarkably, nearly everyone did. They grew up loose and unbuckled and gloriously, thoroughly unsupervised, and the great majority of them turned out perfectly fine in the end, carrying their small collected scars and their singed eyebrows around for the rest of their lives like modest souvenirs from a rougher, freer sort of world. It wasn't that they failed to care, not for one moment. They loved their children fiercely and completely, held them close in the front seat, sent them off each morning into the long summer days with a full stomach and a loud goodbye ringing in their ears. They simply hadn't yet learned all the things we happen to know now, and they lived out their days cheerfully, and yes, dangerously, inside that particular pocket of not knowing. There's something quietly tender about it, looking back from this distance. A whole generation moving steadily through their ordinary days with the windows rolled down and the front doors standing open, trusting the road beneath them, trusting the neighbors next door, trusting the family doctor, trusting even the slow-moving fog truck rolling down the street, all of them sure, in their own quiet way, that tomorrow would look very much like today. So much of what they did without a second thought, we've since fenced off carefully with new laws and warning labels and sturdy locks, and rightly so, in nearly every case. But something warm did slip quietly away in that particular trade, and it feels worth remembering tonight that it was ever there at all. So as you settle now into your own safe, sealed and gently monitored modern life, maybe spare one soft, unhurried thought for the people of that smoky, unbuckled decade, who made it through all of it on nothing more than luck and stubbornness and love. They made it through so that the rest of us could finally rest easy. And now so can you. Television without a remote, and a world without a warning label. The living room in the evening runs on a single television set, bulky and wood-paneled, with a set of round dials instead of any remote control, and changing the channel means someone, usually the youngest person in the room, by unspoken family law, actually gets up, crosses the carpet, and turns the dial by hand. There are only a handful of channels to choose from in the first place, so the whole family tends to watch the same program together by simple necessity rather than any real preference, gathered on a shared couch in front of a screen that takes a full minute or two to properly warm up after being switched on. The commercials that run between programs would raise eyebrows today for reasons that have nothing to do with the products themselves and everything to do with who's doing the selling. A doctor in a white coat, cigarette in hand, calmly recommends one brand over another, speaking with the same measured authority he'd use to discuss a diagnosis. A cartoon rabbit sells sugary cereal directly to children with a jingle so catchy it will still be rattling around in your head 40 years later. Toy commercials promise realistic-looking guns and genuinely sharp-edged plastic swords, sold without a second thought to any child whose parents will hand over the money. The children in the room, meanwhile, sit close enough to the screen that a modern parent would wince on sight, cross-legged directly in front of the glass, well inside the range that any current guidance would call far too close, though nobody in 1974 has heard of such guidance in the first place. Nobody worries about the flicker, or the static electricity that makes your hair stand up faintly if you get close enough, or much of anything at all, really. The television simply runs, dial-operated and warm to the touch, and the whole family gathers around it together most evenings the same way they'd gather around a fireplace, because in its own quiet way, that's more or less exactly what it's become. The school bus and the playground with no padding anywhere. The school bus that picks you up each morning has bench seats with no belts of any kind, an aisle you're free to stand and wander in the moment the bus starts moving, and a driver who occasionally reaches back without even glancing over his shoulder to swat away whichever kid has climbed a little too far into the aisle. Nobody questions any of this. It's simply how the bus works, the same way it's always worked, for as far back as anyone in the neighborhood can actually remember. The elementary school playground waiting at the other end of that ride is built almost entirely out of hard, unforgiving materials. A metal slide that turns scorching hot to the touch on any sunny afternoon. Monkey bars set directly over bare asphalt with no padding of any kind beneath them. A rickety merry-go-round that spins considerably faster than any responsible adult would actually recommend once a determined group of 10-year-olds gets it properly going. Scraped knees are simply an accepted, near-daily cost of recess. A kid who falls off the monkey bars onto the asphalt below dusts himself off, examines the damage for a moment, and gets right back in line for another turn, because that's simply what recess is and has always been. The seesaw at the far end of the yard, unpadded on both sides and entirely reliant on the good faith of whoever happens to be sitting on the other end, teaches its own quiet, memorable lesson about trust the very first time a kid decides to jump off without any warning at all, sending his partner slamming down hard onto the blacktop below. Nobody sues anyone over it. Nobody calls the school board. You simply learn, the hard way and rather quickly, exactly who on the playground can be trusted on the other end of that seesaw, and who very much cannot. Riding bikes with nothing on your head. Out on the street after school, every kid in the neighborhood rides an actual bicycle rather than anything battery-assisted, and not a single one of them wears a helmet, because bicycle helmets, as a genuine consumer product that ordinary families actually buy, essentially don't exist yet in any meaningful way. You ride with the wind directly in your hair, weaving between parked cars, popping the occasional wheelie down the middle of the street, racing your friends down a hill with your hands held straight out at your sides just to prove you can. Falling is simply part of riding. You scrape a knee or an elbow or occasionally your whole forehead against the pavement, and you get back up, wipe off whatever gravel has embedded itself in the wound, and keep riding for the rest of the afternoon regardless. Your mother, if she notices the scrape at all once you're home for dinner, dabs on a bit of iodine, tells you to be more careful next time, and sends you right back outside the following morning without a second thought. The banana seat and the high, swept-back handlebars that define the era's most popular bike design aren't built with any particular safety consideration in mind at all. They're built to look good, to feel like something a slightly older, cooler kid might ride, and that's more or less the entire design brief. Compare that to a modern child, helmeted, padded at the knees and elbows both, riding a bike engineered from the ground up around safety ratings and crash tests, and the distance between the two experiences feels almost impossible to bridge. But in 1974, you simply climb on, push off, and ride, wind in your hair and nothing at all standing between your skull and the pavement, and it never once occurs to you, or to anyone watching you go, that it should. Football practice without enough padding. Out on the field after school, the football team practices in gear that looks, by modern standards, almost comically inadequate. A helmet with far less interior padding than any current model. No separate mouthguard fitted individually to each player, shoulder pads that protect considerably less than the ones a much younger child would wear in a modern youth league today. Coaches run full contact drills daily, sometimes twice in a single afternoon, with hardly any real attention paid to the cumulative effect of all those collisions stacking up, game after game, season after season. A player who takes a hard hit and seems a little foggy afterward, gets a splash of water to the face, gets asked how many fingers the coach happens to be holding up, and gets sent right back out onto the field for the very next play if he can manage to stand upright and answer the question correctly. The word concussion, as a genuine, ongoing medical concern that a coaching staff actively tracks and manages, simply isn't part of the conversation yet in any serious way. Getting your bell rung is simply understood as part of the game, something you shake off, the same way you'd shake off a stubbed toe and get back to business. The comparison to today, where youth leagues now track head impacts with genuine sensors, limit full contact practice time by rule, and pull a player immediately at the very first sign of a possible concussion, is stark enough to feel almost like two entirely different sports. But in 1974, you take the hit, shake your head to clear it, and jog back to the huddle, because that's simply what a tough player does. And toughness, in this particular era, is worth more than nearly anything else you could bring to the field. Roadside diners and the perpetual ashtray. Stop in at any roadside diner along the highway, and the first thing you'll notice, once your eyes adjust to the dim interior lighting, is the haze already hanging in the air, thick enough in places to blur the neon of the jukebox glowing in the corner. Every booth comes furnished with its own glass ashtray, positioned neatly beside the little chrome napkin dispenser, refilled by the waitress as a matter of routine right alongside your coffee. Truckers linger over their pie for hours at a stretch, working through a full pack between one refill of coffee and the next, and nobody at the counter thinks twice about any of it. The jukebox in the corner plays whatever's currently climbing the charts for a dime a song, and the whole diner hums along quietly under its breath whenever a particularly good one comes on. Kids traveling with their families get a paper placemat with a maze printed on the back and a small box of crayons to keep them occupied, while the grown-ups linger over their own coffee and cigarettes. And the whole scene moves at an unhurried, entirely different pace than anything you'd recognize in a modern rest-stop fast food chain, fluorescent lit and thoroughly smoke-free from end to end. A kitchen without warning labels. Back home in the kitchen, the cleaning products under the sink sit within easy reach of any curious toddler, no childproof caps in sight, no locking latch on the cabinet door itself. The oven cleaner carries genuinely serious chemicals, stored right at eye level for anyone under 3 feet tall who happens to go looking. The medicine cabinet in the bathroom holds a full range of pills in ordinary bottles, easy enough for small fingers to twist open in under a minute, should anyone ever feel the urge to try. None of this reads as remotely alarming to the parents living in this particular house, because the entire concept of childproofing, as a deliberate, purchasable category of household safety product, simply hasn't arrived yet in any meaningful way. A parent keeps half an eye on the younger kids, tells them plainly not to touch anything under the sink, and largely trusts that warning to hold, the same general way they trust the seatbelt to stay buried in the seat crease and the medicine cabinet to stay reasonably out of reach on its own. Most days, remarkably, it does. Dentistry without much sympathy. The dentist's office you visit as a child runs on a drill that whines at a pitch and volume no modern patient would ever have to sit through, with a numbing shot that takes its own sweet time to actually kick in, and a general office philosophy that amounts to sit still, hold your breath, and it'll be over soon enough. Nitrous oxide, when it's offered at all, is dispensed with a fairly loose hand, and the whole appointment runs on a schedule built around efficiency rather than comfort. You leave with a sucker for good behavior and a genuine, lasting wariness of the whole building that will follow you for decades. X-rays get taken with considerably less shielding than a modern office would ever consider acceptable, the heavy lead apron draped over you almost as an afterthought rather than a strict protocol followed to the letter every single time. The hygienist scrapes with real force, the whole visit smells faintly of clove oil and antiseptic, and a cavity, once found, gets filled that same afternoon with a dark metal amalgam that will sit in your mouth, largely unremarked upon, for the next 30 years. Summer camp with no waivers in sight. Come July, you're shipped off to summer camp for 2 full weeks with a footlocker, a stack of pre-stamped envelopes for writing home, and shockingly little else in the way of formal preparation. There's no multi-page waiver detailing every conceivable risk, no allergy list circulated in advance to every counselor on staff, no background check run on the 19-year-old counselor who's about to be personally responsible for 11 kids, and a canoe for the better part of 2 weeks straight. You swim in a lake with a rope marking off the deep end, and a lifeguard watching from a wooden chair, no swim test required beyond a counselor's quick, informal judgment call made on the very first afternoon. You hike trails with no formal headcount system, beyond someone shouting names into the trees every so often. You roast marshmallows over a fire built directly on bare ground, no metal fire ring required by any camp policy, and you come home 2 weeks later sunburned, mosquito-bitten, and thoroughly, genuinely happy, with a friendship bracelet on one wrist and absolutely no memory of anyone ever mentioning the word liability. The workplace where women answer phones and little else. Down at the office, the working women on staff are, almost without exception, secretaries answering phones, taking dictation in shorthand, typing letters on heavy manual typewriters that require a genuine effort to press each key down fully. The idea of a woman running her own department, let alone the whole company, remains a rare enough sight that it makes something of a stir whenever it actually happens. Comments about a woman's appearance arrive freely and often in casual conversation around the office, treated as ordinary compliments rather than anything requiring a second thought from anyone involved, least of all the men saying them. A pregnant employee is quietly expected, by unspoken but very real office convention, to leave her position well before the baby actually arrives, and the maternity leave waiting for her afterward, if her job is even still there to return to at all, is measured in a matter of a few short weeks rather than months. None of this reads at the time as any kind of injustice worth remarking upon. It's simply how the office runs, the same way the ashtray on every desk is simply how the office runs. Home repairs and a garage full of genuine hazards. Out in the garage on a Saturday afternoon, your father tackles his own home repairs with a table saw that has no blade guard to speak of, safety goggles that sit forgotten on a shelf somewhere rather than actually on his face, and an extension cord run haphazardly across a floor already slick with a thin layer of motor oil. He works with asbestos-laced insulation while renovating the attic, no mask in sight, no particular concern registering on his face as the fine white dust settles quietly onto his forearms. The paint stripper he uses on the old porch railing carries fumes strong enough to make your eyes water from clear across the yard, and he works through it steadily, with the garage door propped open only about halfway, calling that more than sufficient ventilation. A modern hardware store today would refuse to sell half of what sits casually on his workbench without a full safety briefing attached. But in 1974, he simply gets the job done on a Saturday afternoon, whistling along to the radio, entirely unbothered by any of it. Sunbathing with baby oil and nothing else. At the community pool on a hot Saturday, the teenagers stretch out along the concrete deck, slathered in baby oil rather than sunscreen, actively chasing a deep, dark tan with a small foil reflector propped carefully under the chin to bounce even more direct sun up onto the face. Sunscreen, where it exists at all, carries only a mild, largely symbolic protection factor, and most people skip it entirely regardless, treating a good sunburn as simply the honest cost of a properly earned tan. Children run barefoot across scalding concrete without much complaint, dive into a pool with no fence separating it from the street, and swim for hours under a sun nobody's tracking with any real concern. The peeling skin that follows a particularly bad sunburn gets treated with a bit of aloe plucked straight from a potted plant on the porch, and everyone goes right back out the very next day for more, because that, too, is simply how the whole season works. So there it is, a single, sprawling, thoroughly ordinary day and season in 1974, stretched out across a station wagon and a hospital ward and a basement party and a farm road and a diner booth and a dentist's chair, each one carrying its own small, cheerful disregard for a danger nobody had yet learned to name. You rattled loose in the back of the family car, breathed a building thick with smoke, chased a truck's worth of pesticide fog down the block for the sheer joy of it, and came home each night to a door that never once locked. It's something of a genuine miracle that anyone made it through to the other side of that decade intact. And yet, remarkably, almost everyone did growing up loose and unbuckled and gloriously unsupervised, carrying their small collected scars forward as quiet souvenirs from a rougher, freer sort of world. They loved fiercely. They simply hadn't learned yet what the rest of us would eventually come to know, and they lived out their days cheerfully inside that particular pocket of not knowing, trusting the road, the neighbors, the doctor, the fog truck, sure in their bones that tomorrow would look very much like today. So tonight, as you settle into your own safe, sealed and gently monitored modern life, spare one soft, unhurried thought for the people of that smoky, unbuckled decade, who made it through on nothing more than luck and stubbornness and love. They made it through so that the rest of us could finally rest easy. And now so can you.